The heroine of our story wants a fresh start, but things don't go as she wishes. A little boy with silver hair and red eyes named Callie becomes super clingy to her. And from his appearance, it's obvious he's a child from the Duke's family. He is begging Elia not to divorce his older brother, Cedric and Eugenia, just as Cedric walks into the room. Elia and Cedric are in a contract marriage that is about to expire, but Callie doesn't want his sister-in-law to leave, so he starts making up all sorts of excuses to make her stay, like how Cedric would be a mess without her because he's clumsy and would cut his own fingers. And the kid is afraid of sleeping alone, convinced there are monsters hiding under his bed. But Callie's soul is actually the most powerful in the entire universe, and the monster under his bed is the very great evil that becomes his source of power. The young Duke is destined to become a gravity magician and a master of darkness. As he begs Elia to stay, his older brother tells him to stop making a scene, as she's already in a difficult situation. The girl sees the clear intention in her husband's eyes to get the child out of the room, so she holds him tighter so he won't be scared. But Cedric, like grabbing a disobedient kitten, grabs his younger brother by the scruff of his neck, pulling him away from his wife and explaining that his actions and pleas won't change anything anyway. The boy is naturally angry and shows a displeased expression. He breaks free from his brother's grip and then scolds Cedric in a preachy tone, calling him the biggest idiot in the world, and demands that they don't abandon Elia. But the older brother doesn't want to either. It's just that things have to be this way. Elia, having had enough of the argument, yells at both of them to shut up immediately. She has no idea what's going on with the two brothers and why they're fighting out of nowhere. It all started when our heroine woke up in a completely different body and stared into a mirror. At first, she was completely bewildered, thinking it was a dream, so she blinked, shook her head, and tried everything, but nothing changed. The girl realized she was trapped in the body of a character from a novel she had read, but she knew nothing about her. She finally got some information when she found a diary and learned that she was now the 23-year-old Elia. Since the author barely wrote about her, she was probably just a minor character. You know, with nothing better to do, the girl decided to look around. All she could see from her window was a forest, which was actually a bit romantic, with birds singing and a cool breeze on her face. The weather was great, so Elia decided to take a walk in this crazy world she had landed in. She sat under a tree and once again tried to figure out who this character she had possessed was. Unable to remember anything, she decided not to dwell on it. After all, it was great here, and not everyone gets a chance at a second life, even if it's in a different body. The girl continued to explore the forest, confident that nothing bad would happen along the way. She saw all sorts of cute little animals that looked so adorable she wanted to pet them, but they wouldn't let her touch them and ran away immediately. This didn't bother Elia, though. She was just happy to be breathing fresh air again and walking in such a beautiful forest. Suddenly, she heard someone screaming, as if running from something. Elia turned around and saw a boy being chased by a wolf twice his size. Elia's first instinct was to save the child, and she yelled at him to get behind her. The boy found her request a bit strange, as she was just a girl and not very tall. She told him to hide again, even though she was scared to death herself. But she couldn't just abandon this cute kid, so she decided to try and scare the wolf away. To protect the child, Elia mustered all her courage, knowing she might die again. She glared angrily at the terrifying-looking predator, whose red eyes seemed to reflect all the anger in the world, its sharp fangs ready to sink into human skin. Elia was scared out of her wits, but then she noticed the wolf's leap seemed to be in slow motion. She decided to seize the opportunity and, with a skillful move, kicked it in the stomach. The wolf flew sideways, fell to the ground, and didn't move after that. Elia was surprised at herself, unable to believe she had become so strong as to take down such a beast in one hit. Anyway, the predator was done for, and the boy was now safe. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief and admit to the little guy that she was super scared too. The guy, however, was unusually calm and just thanked her for saving his life. He promised to repay her, but later, as he was short on cash at the moment. It was then that Elia took a closer look at the child's face and remembered that she had a younger brother who looked just like him. This little guy looked exactly like her brother, Uni. The girl even wondered if he had also transmigrated into the novel, and in his own body, though it seemed impossible. But then, the rescued child interjected that his name was not Uni. He was the Grand Duke from the absent royal family, named Caleb Indigenia. Elia was a bit shocked, but now the pieces in her mind started to fit together. She remembered that this child was the embodiment of the dark side from the novel she had read in her past life. She had only one younger brother, Uni, who had to spend his days in the hospital due to a rare disease. But he took his treatment like a warrior, and his sister, a member of the national Taekwondo team, promised her brother she would win that gold medal, which he was excited about. Time flew by, and the day finally came when she actually won that gold medal. They were both ecstatic, thrilled that everything had worked out, and they would never have to worry about money again. She dreamed of sending him to the best hospital, but for Uni, that was his last day. It was a devastating blow for our heroine. It turned out the doctors knew his time was short, but the child begged them not to tell his sister. After losing her brother, she started to indulge in all sorts of media. She became a total web addict, just trying to escape reality. Then one day, she stumbled upon an ad for a web novel that looked interesting, so she started reading. The cover caught her eye. There was a dark face in the crowd that looked exactly like Uni. That's why she immediately got hooked on the novel, and now that face was right in front of her. Callie guessed she saved him because she mistook him for someone named Uni and apologized for not being him. But even his voice was identical to her brother's from her past life. The kid didn't seem evil now. He even promised that in return for saving his life, she could ask for anything she wanted. He added that he was a bit injured, or else he would have dealt with the wolf himself using magic. The fact that the little guy was injured worried Elia greatly. Only then did she notice the blood on his hand and freaked out, even though the wound was small. She took his hand to examine it and saw some other red spots on his palm. Anyway, she suggested going back to her nearby cottage so she could bandage his wounds. She first wrapped his hand with her handkerchief, and he thanked her again. Then she pointed the way they needed to go, but noticed the child was limping a little. He might have twisted his ankle while running from the predator, but Callie insisted he wasn't hurt at all. This didn't reassure her, and she told him to let her know if it started to hurt. The little guy even felt a bit embarrassed to be in this state in front of a lady. From the outside, it might have looked like Elia was scolding him, but she was just worried about him. It was then that she remembered something from a novel. Callie was going through some sort of deficiency for some reason, and the vassals didn't like him and always held him to super strict standards. But the girl only saw a cute kid and didn't understand why others hated him. The original novel didn't delve into the reasons why. Under such standards, even though he was from a ducal house, the kid was probably being crushed. Elia just wanted to take care of him. He was just a child surrounded by a bunch of jerks. When he said he wasn't hurt, it reminded her of how her brother Uni used to say the same thing. She turned around, crouched down, and told him to hop on. Callie didn't understand what she was doing at first, so she explained that she would carry him on her back because his leg was hurt. The child again started insisting that it didn't hurt and he could walk on his own. Just like Uni used to swear it didn't hurt when he walked on his own. Looking at Callie, Elia just said she wanted to help and there was nothing to be ashamed of. She told him to think of her as his older sister, and there was nothing wrong with a younger brother getting a piggyback ride from his sister. Later, Callie stared at his bandaged finger, wishing he had a magic wand to heal himself. She even made him a cup of hot cocoa with the last of her cocoa powder. She only poured some plain water for herself, as there wasn't enough for a second cup. The child thanked her again for taking care of him, while Elia was just fond of this kid living in a world about to be consumed by fear. But then she started to wonder why she was with Callie. I mean, he was the main character and she was just a side character. But for now, the most important thing was to get him well. As she watched the child sip his cocoa, his stomach suddenly growled loudly. She realized he was starving but wouldn't admit it, so she unconsciously started scolding him again, especially when he told her he had been wandering in the forest since dawn and it was now 5 p.m. Her mission now was to feed Callie, but she was surprised when he admitted he doesn't eat dinner. The kid was trying not to gain weight to look good at an event because that's what his teacher told him. Elia felt they were torturing the child. He was still a kid, and they were already restricting his food. She really wanted to take out the jerk who put the kid on a diet, but now she understood why Callie felt so light when she carried him on her back. Elia told Callie to wait a moment and started cooking, cursing the jerk teacher in her mind. She only had potatoes at home, but she still managed to make a few dishes with them. She felt a bit bad for not being able to make something better for the child, and he was just amazed at how quickly she could make everything, as if she were using magic. Elia was just used to it after all this time, and she told the little guy to dig in. For about 20 minutes during dinner, she kept telling Callie to ignore his teacher and just eat. Callie found the food quite good, though a bit spicier than he was used to. Then the girl handed the child some potato chips, and from his expression, he had never seen them before. Callie agreed to try them, but asked her not to feed him with a spoon. As he chewed, Elia watched with appreciation, seeing how much he enjoyed it. He really thought it tasted amazing and unforgettable. The girl promised to make some more later, but she needed to go buy ingredients the next day. As night fell, Callie gradually fell asleep. When he opened his eyes the next morning, the sun was already high in the sky, and he panicked, thinking he had overslept. Then, when he didn't see the familiar walls, he was confused, looked around, and realized he was still at Elia's house. Even so, the boy felt he shouldn't have slept so long, although he was glad his body got some rest. He couldn't believe he had just fallen asleep like that. He hadn't had a peaceful night's sleep since that one time some psycho committed that perverted murder. Just then, Elia returned, carrying a bag on her shoulder, hoping Callie had slept well. The girl didn't want to wake him up too early. She had already gone out to buy some things. Today she planned to make a super delicious stew for her little guest for lunch. Callie rubbed his eyes and started to recall how Elia had saved him from that vicious wolf. She had taken it down in one hit yesterday, and she could even heal wounds. This young lady seemed simple, but at the same time charming, like a little angel. Callie also liked that she was a good cook, and he wanted to know more about her. But if he started asking questions, Elia would start asking questions too, and he didn't want to talk about himself. The child just asked her to wake him up earlier tomorrow if he overslept again. He explained that he couldn't wake up late, but this struck Elia as strange. So she started pressing for a reason. I mean, she didn't have any schedule here, and she didn't see anything wrong with a child getting enough sleep. Her house was no grand ducal mansion, so when Callie was her guest, he didn't need to follow those silly rules. Here, he was just a normal kid who could relax, eat, play, or sleep as much as he wanted. The boy seemed a bit flustered, and Elia patted his head, telling him not to be afraid to act like a normal kid. In that moment, the boy felt this woman was nothing short a hero. In such a short time, he had learned about her many talents, and she was also super kind. Besides, no one had ever patted his head like that before. Then Elia told him to go wash up and come sit down to eat. He still couldn't believe he could just be a normal kid instead of a duke with heavy responsibilities. He was always told to act like an adult, and if he misbehaved, they would hit his hands with a ruler. This made him feel like he shouldn't be doing what Elia was telling him to do. But her words made him very happy, even if she made him chamomile tea instead of cocoa. He also really liked the food she made today, and Elia was just happy to satisfy the child's appetite. Callie started to feel all sorts of things. This girl seemed incredible, and he told her so. Because the child looked like Uni, it felt like she had known him for years. It was then that Callie really wanted to tell her everything about himself and also learn more about her. It was a simple request, but Elia didn't know how to tell him about herself. So she asked him to tell his story first. Elia had read about him in the novel, but she was curious to hear it directly from him without revealing herself. She also wanted to do something to stop Callie from becoming a villain. The boy's face suddenly turned sad, but he began anyway. The girl confirmed that he had an older brother, whom she had read a lot about in the original story. Cedric was adopted by the Indigenia family at the age of 10 and mastered gravity magic. At 13, he became the strongest in the world and revived a magic that had been lost for over a century. Even though they weren't related by blood, Callie fell deeply in love with Cedric. Just then, the boy's face became unusually serious, and he confessed that his brother was cursed last year. They said only the caster could lift the curse, but unfortunately, they still couldn't find him. Elia thought to herself, a fairy's curse? What on earth was that about? This was probably the reason Callie turned into the dark incarnation. The original novel mentioned Daphne, the patron saint of the Marinist family, and Prince Reno of the Prison Empire. One day, a fairy appeared before Reno, intending to put him into an eternal slumber. This fairy began to cast a spell on him so that the prince would sleep forever. At that moment, Daphne appeared before Reno and deflected the curse with her magic. Then, after she protected him from the evil fairy, Daphne and Reno fell in love. Now, as Callie talked about his brother's curse, he said there was a way to lift it, the Temple of Knowledge. Only authorized personnel could enter this place. The pillars of the Empire, the Malaysiat, Marinist, and Indigenia families. Furthermore, only the head of the family or an heir who had sworn allegiance till the family could enter. The fastest way for Cedric to enter the Temple of Knowledge was to become the Grand Duke himself, but he didn't want the throne and instead wanted Callie to become the Grand Duke. For his brother's sake, the child was willing to do it, but he was worried he wouldn't be able to lift the curse. However, he promised to do everything he could to enter the Temple of Knowledge. Elia remembered that when Callie became the Grand Duke, Cedric's condition would worsen. The child would quickly enter that temple. He would go through every piece of information he could find, but would find nothing about fairies or curses. Then one day, he would be told that the fairy had been captured alive by the royal court. Callie would rush to the dungeon where she was being held. He knew she was the only one who could lift his brother's curse, but he never got to speak with her. By the time he arrived, the fairy was already mysteriously dead. After that, Callie would become convinced that there was a conspiracy within the royal family. He would lose all trust, be filled with hatred, and, heartbroken by his brother's illness, he would want to destroy them. Callie would turn to forbidden black magic and make a pact with an archdemon. Once that happened, no one would be able to stop him. Elia thought with a heavy heart about the whole story that was about to unfold. But for now, she was just looking at a child who looked so much like her brother. The girl decided that as long as Callie was in this cottage, she would do everything she could to change the future. Elia hugged the boy, assuring him that he would become a great duke and save his brother. She promised to help him in any way she could. That night, she slept next to him, holding him like a loving older sister. She believed everything would be all right and kept trying to instill that belief in him. The next week went on like this. Then one day, they went for a walk in the woods, making flower crowns and playing like normal kids. Looking at his face now, she could tell that Callie had changed. The child was smiling most of the time, enjoying every fun moment. That cruelty was gone. He laughed more often, and his emotions felt genuine. This was how a normal child should be. Then Callie caught a rabbit and brought it to Elia, asking her what to do with it. It was the same rabbit Elia had failed to catch a week ago, and she was happy to see it again. But seeing her face, the little guy suddenly got scared, broke free, and ran away again. The girl couldn't understand why it only hid from her, as if there was something on her face that was terrifying to rabbits. But she explained to Callie that the animal was just startled because she got too close too quickly. Then she suggested they go back to the cottage for a snack and held out her hand to the boy. He eagerly reached out in response, and Elia noticed his wound was almost healed. He had been with her for several days now, and soon he would have to return to the ducal estate. Just like me, Elia found it strange that, after all this time, neither Callie's brother nor anyone else was looking for him. Meanwhile, late at night, Cedric stood by his bedroom window, wondering where his brother was now. In fact, he had been searching for his brother, pouring everything he had into finding him. Suddenly, winter arrived, and the entire duchy was covered in fluffy snow. Cedric received a warning from the royal family, demanding he stop using weather magic. His advisor, Edwin Polinoa, also reported that the gates were blocked by snow and the vassals couldn't get out. If this continued, the castle and farmlands would suffer a severe blow. The Duke claimed everything was under his control, and he just needed to clarify a few things. So if Edwin wanted to stop the blizzard, he needed to find Callie. Basically, he was shifting all the responsibility to his servant. Cedric found it strange that a whole week had passed, and they had no leads, not even knowing if his brother was still alive. He was angry that the vassals only cared about the weather, as if that was more important than the young Duke's life. He ordered them to bring Callie to him as soon as possible, and he didn't care how they found him, even if every vassal froze to death. The advisor bowed his head and promised to carry out the order. Alone, Cedric complained that his vassals were only whining about the cold while his brother was missing. He couldn't bear to just sit and wait for him to return, praying he was still alive. He had even contacted the Empire's intelligence guild, but they hadn't found a single trace. There was only one guild he hadn't been to yet, the Dark Guild. Meanwhile, Callie was staying with Elia. As they were getting ready for bed again, the girl told him to come over so she could change his bandage. She needed to change it often so it wouldn't get worse and the wound could heal faster. Elia quickly tied on a new bandage, noticing that the wound was indeed healing quickly. Elia was sure that in a few more days, the child would be fully recovered. Callie looked at the bandage on his finger and for some reason became depressed. The expression on his face was very sad, as if he had lost something incredibly precious. That was because he didn't want to return to the duchy so soon, but neither did Elia. She just hoped his hand would heal quickly, and then they started getting ready for bed. The little boy suddenly turned to the mistress of the house. wanting to tell her something important, but he changed his mind and told her not to worry. But the girl probably knew what he was thinking, as she had been watching him the whole time. As they slept, Caleb wondered when he would be able to use magic and return to the duchy. He knew it was the right thing to do, the path he had to take. Even if he didn't want to, he had to go back to his brother's side. Caleb remembered telling Cedric that if he became the Grand Duke, he could prove his loyalty and enter the Temple of Knowledge. The little boy couldn't understand why his brother would refuse the title, but he didn't want it and wished for his younger brother to lead the family. The little one needed time to grow, but he wanted to break Cedric's curse now. But Cedric told him not to worry, that there was another way and he didn't have to go to the Temple of Knowledge. Later, Caleb overheard the maids whispering that Lord Cedric was getting married. It was strange news for everyone, as if getting married could save his life. But even the maids believed that only the Temple of Knowledge could save the young lord. Now that Cedric had given up the title, he could only prove his loyalty to the family through marriage. But with rumors flying around, finding him a wife would be very difficult. They said the curse was contagious, and this news terrified Caleb. It was unknown who spread these rumors, but one thing was certain. No one was willing to marry Cedric now. Caleb couldn't figure out why his brother hadn't told him about these things, as if he didn't want to involve him, or perhaps he just didn't trust him. He just wished Cedric would be honest with him and not keep secrets. Then his thoughts returned to Elia, and he imagined her and his brother as a couple. Based on their looks, the two of them really suited each other. Besides, the girl was very kind and talented, a perfect match for Cedric. Now, the little boy hoped Elia could help his brother. If they got married, then he could prove his loyalty, enter the Temple of Knowledge, and find a way to break the curse. After that, they could all live together, and Caleb would never feel lonely again. But then the little boy realized he shouldn't be thinking about these things at all, as it made him seem like a complete egomaniac. He was afraid he would end up all alone forever. He didn't want to ruin the girl's life, so he swore he would go back as soon as his arm healed. He fell asleep thinking about it, but he dreamed all night of him, Cedric, and Elia living together like one big family. The next day, Elia asked him what he wanted for lunch, promising to make something delicious, but Caleb was in a very bad mood. He acted as if he didn't care. Seeing him so dejected, the girl was taken aback, not knowing what had made the little one so unhappy. Then she suddenly realized he had been like this since morning, and she hadn't even noticed. Elia was at a loss, but she wasn't about to give up. She announced to Caleb that she would be making spiced potato soup for lunch, and she also needed a few lemons, so she asked the little boy to go pick some. Caleb, looking like a kicked puppy, drooped his face and agreed to her request. But Elia noticed his steps were very heavy and unsteady, as if he could fall at any moment. Getting some fresh air outside should cheer him up, so she planned to take him out later. But just as Caleb reached the door, a figure in a hooded cloak suddenly walked in. She feared for the little boy, because this guy looked extremely strange. Then he started reaching for him, saying he had finally found him. Oh, heavens! Elia was not one to be trifled with. She grabbed a frying pan and swung it at the intruder's head. She didn't like the way this guy was looking at Caleb, and she especially hated that he had barged in without knocking. The guy looked very suspicious, and Elia thought he was here to take the child away. She brandished the frying pan again, trying to drive the stranger away, when she heard him call Caleb his younger brother. The little boy then walked towards him and asked if he was okay. My goodness, getting hit in the head with a cast iron pan was no joke. Most people would have collapsed on the spot. Elia was completely petrified when she realized who she had just hit with her cookware. The blow was very powerful, and although Cedric tried to stay on his feet, he passed out. Elia felt very guilty, but she had no idea who was under the hood. She helped the Duke to the bed to rest. Seeing Elia terrified, Caleb kept saying it wasn't her fault and that anyone would have done the same. The little boy even promised to explain everything to his brother when he woke up. Meanwhile, Caleb hadn't expected his brother to find him so quickly. The situation became a bit awkward, and to stall for time, the little boy went to get a wet towel. The girl stayed behind to look after the man who had just been knocked out. She thought she heard Caleb mutter something before he went into the kitchen. Just then, she heard a faint groan nearby. Cedric was starting to wake up, so Elia decided to get the cold compress herself and let Caleb watch over his brother. But she found the Duke was still unconscious, as if he were talking in his sleep. Elia noticed his overly tight collar and decided to unbutton it to let him breathe more easily. The moment she touched the button, Cedric instantly grabbed her hand and opened his eyes. The young master demanded she explain what she was trying to do. Caught off guard and a little scared, Elia froze on the spot, not knowing what to say. And Cedric thought she was some kind of pervert trying to take advantage of him. This greatly shocked her, as she was only trying to help. The young master kept questioning her motives, but with a certain insinuation, you know. Then he directly asked her why she had kidnapped Caleb. The girl was struck speechless by his words, both surprised and scared. This guy was accusing her of something she hadn't done at all. Furthermore, he thought she had set up some kind of barrier to prevent him from finding the place. Just then, Elia found her voice and shouted that he was completely mistaken. Then she turned around, ready to go find Caleb immediately. But with a thud, some kind of force slammed her to the floor like a powerful magnet, and she couldn't even move a finger. Cedric, thinking she was trying to escape, had used gravity magic to pin her to the ground. Although she repeatedly insisted she wasn't running away, he didn't seem to believe her. The atmosphere became incredibly heavy, and Elia realized this guy, named Cedric, wasn't going to let her off easily. But just then, Caleb whipped him in the face with the towel, telling him to get away from Elia. He also demanded that Cedric immediately release the magic and let the girl go. To make Cedric understand, the little boy explained that this girl had saved his life. Cedric then learned that his younger brother had almost been eaten by a wolf, but Elia had stepped in and taken down the beast. Now, the little boy was utterly disgusted with his brother for trying to kill his own savior. In that moment, Cedric's face was filled with pure shock. Then he wondered why Caleb didn't just use magic to return to the duchy. It turned out the little boy had set up the barrier himself, and Elia was surprised that he had used magic. She didn't understand how he did it, because his hand was still badly injured yesterday. But Caleb admitted he had used magic because he wanted to spend a little more time with Elia. Then he apologized to the girl, feeling sorry for having to deceive her. Despite his injury, he could still use magic, and he had to trick her to avoid going back so soon. The girl was a little surprised, but she understood the boy's wish and wasn't angry at all. Elia hugged him and explained that his motives weren't wrong and that he shouldn't apologize. This moved Caleb deeply, and he began to cry, which was a bit surprising because in the original story, he had never shed a single tear. Meanwhile, Elia herself didn't want to be separated from this boy who made her so happy. When she admitted this, Caleb suggested she go with them to the duchy. This was unexpected for her, but what was even stranger was hearing that she should marry Cedric. They decided to discuss it later, and Caleb was told to go to sleep, which he did quickly. Elia was still reeling from what had happened, but she thought she should prepare something for the other guest as well. So she went to the kitchen to prepare food, and just then, Cedric suddenly appeared. And guess what? He had taken off his soaked shirt and was about to sit down at the table just like that. The girl was flustered by the sight of him, and she didn't understand why he had to do that. While the food was still cooking, she gave him some warm tea. The Duke thanked her, and as he drank, Elia realized she was staring at his well-built physique. She immediately turned her head away, knowing it was rude to stare like that, but she couldn't help thinking the Duke looked much better than those muscular men in kimonos. While Elia's mind was wandering, Cedric stood up and apologized for barging into her place like that. Moreover, he knew she had hit him with the frying pan to protect Caleb. The girl wanted to continue the conversation, but to avoid the awkwardness, she tossed him a blanket to cover himself. She was curious about him, this man who had almost no screen time in the original story. His eyes were cold, but Cedric seemed to be a decent person at heart. Then she remembered Caleb's strange request and asked why the little boy would mention marriage. Cedric said bluntly that it was most likely because of the curse. Caleb believed the cure might be recorded in the Temple of Knowledge, but you had to be the head of the family to enter. And there was also a ceremony that had to be performed where you swear an oath of allegiance. Only a blood relative could perform this ritual, and Cedric's bloodline didn't qualify. But if he were married, he would have the right to perform the ceremony. So that's why Caleb asked her to marry him. The Duke frankly admitted that he had never seen his brother like this, trusting someone so much. Then he dropped a bombshell on Elia. Because of rumors that the curse was contagious, no one wanted to marry him. But that was just a rumor someone had deliberately spread to put her at ease. Cedric promised that as soon as his brother woke up, they would return to the duchy immediately. Elia remembered Caleb wanted to spend more time with her and asked why they were trying to make him the Grand Duke. Cedric had been honest with her so far, and she hoped he would give her an answer. So he confessed that for some unknown reason, Caleb had been kidnapped at birth. His parents searched for 4 years before finding him in an orphanage. At this, Elia recalled the assassination of the Indigenia family mentioned in the original story. They were attacked on their way back from the orphanage, and everyone in the carriage was killed. Caleb was the sole survivor, and it was an utter tragedy for everyone. Since then, some vassals had hated the little duke and spread rumors. Since Cedric's bloodline made him ineligible for the title, Caleb had to become the Grand Duke to protect himself. His brother didn't want Caleb to always depend on others, and he saw his own curse as a secondary problem. Now Elia began to understand why Cedric was trying so hard to keep his little brother alive. But if that were the case, the little boy wouldn't be able to live the life he wanted. The girl knew there was nothing she could do but listen. But if Cedric married her and entered the Temple of Knowledge, he wouldn't find a cure for the curse either. That only left finding the fairy who had cursed him in the first place. Cedric noticed the look of concern on the cottage owner's face, and she was just mentally cursing herself for not thinking of this sooner. I mean, she had read the novel, and she knew that when Caleb became the Grand Duke, that fairy kidnapped the protagonist. So Elia decided to find her before the royal family did. Besides, it was never clear how she died. The girl planned to find out who this fairy was, especially since she saw her face and name at the end of the novel. The only problem was that her memory was a bit faded, and she couldn't quite recall that episode. Anyway, Elia decided to cheer Cedric up by telling him she knew another way to break the curse. And they didn't necessarily have to get married. She could change the course of history. The girl tried again to picture what the fairy's face looked like. As the memories began to surface, Elia went into a complete trance, so much so that even Cedric had trouble snapping her out of it. She remembered the description of silver hair with a pinkish hue. The fairy's eyes were like two precious gems. Elia was shocked to discover that it was she herself who had cursed Cedric. As the Duke tried to bring her back from her shock, her mind was still racing, and she realized she could actually break the curse herself. Later, when Caleb woke up, they told him that Elia had agreed to marry Cedric. The girl tried her best to act happy about going to the duchy with them. Cedric also confirmed it was true, though he was clearly a bit nervous. Elia herself had proposed to him yesterday as a way to break his curse. The young master was obviously surprised, but you could see the joy on his face. But first, Elia wanted to clarify a few things. Since she was the one who caused this mess, she might as well be the one to fix it. All she had ever wanted was to see the two of them live happily ever after. But now that was impossible, as she had no memory of what she had done as the real Elia. She only knew her name and age, and she didn't even know the basics of magic. Now the girl felt completely hopeless, afraid she wouldn't be able to do anything. At least Caleb didn't recognize her, probably because she always wore a black hood before. The story had changed now, but she just wanted to run away, afraid the little boy would find out who she was, and then he would unleash all his fury on her for messing with them and not breaking the curse. The thought of having to die, if that happened, terrified Elia. But there was another problem. When the fairy was imprisoned, she died very mysteriously. It could have been a chronic illness, or maybe one of her former vassals did her in. Either way, Elia was doomed whether she ran or not. So, her best chance of survival now was to marry Cedric and see how things played out. Elia hoped she could eventually find a way to break the curse, and then she could slip away and live far away. She could finally live her own life, and Cedric and Caleb could live happily ever after. Obviously, Elia didn't want to get involved at first, but now that she was the fairy, she had to help them. She no longer cared that this was the world of a novel. These people were real to her now. Later, Cedric explained to his little brother that he was marrying Elia, but it would be an unusual marriage. They were entering into a marriage contract that would last until the curse was broken. Then she would be free to return home. Surprisingly, Caleb didn't throw a fit, as if he had expected this. Elia and Cedric had decided to tell the little boy everything at once so he wouldn't get upset. Later, he pretended to understand, but then he said Elia didn't have to return to this godforsaken place, because divorcing Cedric didn't mean she had to leave the duchy. She could live with Caleb, and she would need some kind of official status, and the little boy promised to become her guardian. The news that she could continue living in the castle was a surprise and a bit of a shock to Elia, but it meant something had changed in Caleb himself, and for the better. Just then, Cedric interjected that a suggestion would be complicated, because first they had to consider what Elia really wanted. It was then that the little boy declared that the lady enjoyed being with him, and she had told him so herself. That's when he realized that Elia had never really talked about what she wanted. Both brothers stared at her, waiting for some kind of answer, but she just froze. Sensing the awkwardness, Cedric suggested they change locations and leave this place, and that they needed to finalize the details of the contract anyway. Elia agreed. This whole situation was the best opportunity to solve Cedric's problem, and Caleb, he was just thrilled that she would be staying a little longer. Elia felt a little sorry for the kid, who had to grow up too fast. Besides, she actually enjoyed being with him because he reminded her of Uni. Elia hoped her memories would return, she would break the curse, and Caleb wouldn't throw the world into chaos. But she knew that, at the end of the day, she was responsible as Elia, even if it all happened before her reincarnation. So she couldn't tell Caleb their happiness was a lie, and she decided to discard these feelings as soon as possible. But for now, she needed to focus on solving the problem at hand. Soon, they arrived at the castle, its gloomy atmosphere almost completely covered in white snow. The snow didn't last long, as Cedric dispelled the magic. After looking around, Elia thought the place was simply magnificent. The girl was excited, especially since she knew nothing about this place, and she even doubted if she was up to the task given to her. Later, Cedric explained that she would have to meet the vassals, which scared her a little. But now that Caleb was back at the palace, the Duke needed to announce it and let everyone know about their upcoming wedding. She didn't have to do anything else today and could rest in her room, where a maid would take her. Just then, the young master's advisor came over and whispered something to him. Then Cedric prepared to leave for a meeting, telling Elia to let him know if she needed anything. But then Caleb stopped him, announcing that he wanted to attend the meeting too. This was a bit unexpected for both Cedric and Elia. Originally, the child never attended meetings until his brother fell into a coma. But now Caleb understood that in the forest he could be just a normal boy, but not here. Back then, Elia had saved him and taken care of him, and she even had to accept his request. That's why he wanted to guarantee her safety during her stay in the duchy. The girl was a little shocked and didn't know what to say. Cedric, on the other hand, noticed that the lady had given his younger brother confidence in just a few days. He agreed to take Caleb with him, and Caleb promised Elia he would be back soon. She was left alone, worried about whether the child would be okay. She wished she could go with him, but she trusted that with Cedric there, nothing bad would happen. A minute later, a girl with dark pink hair walked in, Olivia, Elia's new maid. The girl seemed mild-tempered and didn't raise any alarms. Elia just silently celebrated having her own personal maid. She learned from Olivia that the meeting with the vassals had already begun. She started worrying again about how Caleb would handle it, because despite his title, he was still just a child. At the meeting, Marquis Reynold Babylon was furious that some woman was going to marry the head of the family. But Cedric told him to watch his words and not to call him that in front of the future Grand Duke. He also said he loved the girl, so everyone had better watch their mouths. The Marquis couldn't argue and could only grit his teeth in anger. Cedric was here to make an announcement, not to be lectured, and he planned to marry as soon as possible. The ministers remembered when a young master used magic to freeze the entire palace when Caleb went missing, so they decided not to push him. But they began to plot to get rid of the upstart, and Marquis Babylon was going crazy, because if Cedric got married, his entire plan would be ruined. Babylon was the only brother of the former Grand Duchess Idyll, making him Cedric and Caleb's uncle. After murdering all the family members, he still failed to become the second in command. But when Cedric was cursed, the Marquis began to brew a new plan and spread rumors to prevent him from marrying. People were afraid the curse was contagious and gradually began to distance themselves from Cedric. So the Marquis planned to use his tutor Gerald's daughter to get rid of Caleb. After that, Cedric would become the Grand Duke, and to break the curse, he would have to marry Gerald. This would make Marquis Babylon a man with absolute power. But the appearance of this woman changed everything. Reynold was worried that Cedric would eventually enter the Temple of Knowledge and might learn something about Caleb's past. Then Cedric just announced that his fiancée would be taking etiquette lessons with Caleb. This made the Marquis even more annoyed because his daughter did not graduate from the academy to be a tutor for some commoner. Caleb told Babylon to shut up, demanding that they not address the lady that way, his face contorted with anger. Reynold was even scared, as he had never seen the boy like this. At the same time, he exuded a strong sense of pressure as he reminded them that the lady was the future Duchess. From the boy's reaction, it was clear to everyone that this girl meant a great deal to him. Babylon knew he was done for now, but decided to turn this problem into an opportunity. The first thing he did was to find a way to drive this girl out of the duchy. Meanwhile, Elia was completely stunned. The bed was so soft, she had never slept on such a comfortable bed, not even in her previous life. The next morning, she found that she wasn't swollen at all, even though she had gone to bed late. It turned out that she had used some very high-end skincare products the night before. Now her eyes truly looked like precious jewels, and she was thrilled about it. Then, a maid appeared and announced that breakfast was ready. Olivia pushed an entire dining table into the room, piled high with all sorts of delicacies. Elia couldn't believe she could eat and drink these exquisite foods without a care in the world. Olivia said to let her know when she was done with breakfast, as Master Cedric was waiting for her. The maid even offered to help Elia coordinate her outfit, but she insisted she could handle it herself. But Olivia argued that she was going to see her fiancé, so she needed to look flawless. Cedric was buried in paperwork in his office when someone informed him that Miss Elia had arrived. Without looking up, he apologized for making her come see him so early, but she reassured him that she was in a great mood after having sweet dreams on that soft bed. Cedric was glad she liked the room and asked her to wait a moment while he finished his paperwork. But when he looked up, he saw her transformed appearance. He was now facing a true beauty. Her sweet smile only added to her charm. Cedric found himself being captivated by her, but he decided to remain calm and, in a composed voice, asked her again to wait a little longer. Elia fully noticed that the guy had frozen when he saw her, and she was rather enjoying it. While she was waiting, Cedric's right-hand man, Edwin Polinoa, came over and greeted her. She remembered seeing him yesterday and was glad to finally get a formal introduction. Edwin began to explain the reason for her sudden summons, but Duke Cedric cut him off, saying he would handle it, and Edwin made a hasty retreat. He was blushing like a beetroot, which Elia found a little amusing. Then the Duke snapped his fingers, and a transparent dome popped up around them. He explained to Elia that this way, no one could eavesdrop on their conversation. Then, he asked Elia if she remembered anything, but she drew a blank. Then she remembered that she had told him she had amnesia and said that the situation still hadn't improved. She had no choice, but honestly, she knew nothing about her own character. They decided to keep her amnesia a secret from everyone in the castle, though fortunately, Caleb had immediately believed her story. Elia just didn't know what Cedric thought of it. The Duke then handed her a contract, explaining that they needed to reach an agreement and set a wedding date as soon as possible. The contract was for a term of 3 years, and if the curse wasn't broken by then, the contract would be extended. Elia would also receive a monthly salary. Cedric only asked that she keep a record of all her expenses, and she was stunned to see the long string of zeros when he told her to let him know if it wasn't enough. After calculating that it was equivalent to 3 billion won per month, Elia was so surprised she almost screamed, but this made Cedric think the amount was too low. This was another shock for Elia. In her previous life, this amount of money could buy a decent house. She could understand why Cedric was being so generous. The contract was even adjusted in her favor. But then she decided it was hush money, and she wasn't wrong. In addition, Cedric explained that she would receive this money as compensation for the restriction of her freedom. He then asked her to consider another clause. She could not leave the duchy without an escort. In other words, if she wanted to step outside the territory's borders, she had to be accompanied by either Cedric or Caleb. Furthermore, an order of knights would be formed to protect her, and the servants would all be from his inner circle. They would be the Duke's eyes and ears, which started to frighten her. She realized that during her time in the duchy, Cedric would be monitoring her every move. They were both silent for a moment, and the Duke gave her time to think it over. She struggled to recover from her shock, realizing she was practically a prisoner here. But on second thought, she had nothing to lose, especially since she would be living a life of luxury, so she agreed to the terms. The young master had expected a slightly different reaction from her, and didn't think she would accept so readily. But Elia explained that she understood his concerns. After all, she couldn't explain herself either, and she didn't mind at all that he was a little suspicious of her. Besides, after her previous life, the girl was already used to being watched at all times. Next, Elia finished reading the rest of the contract and said there was nothing to amend. Cedric still asked her to let him know if she suddenly thought of anything to add. But the girl felt the contract was already perfectly written with nothing to add. She knew that once the curse was lifted, she would be compensated, buy herself a house, and enjoy a splendid life of solitude there. But she remembered the happy time she had with Caleb, so she asked to add one more clause to the contract. Elia wanted the right to visit the duchy from time to time after the divorce, so she could see Caleb. This request struck Cedric as a bit strange. Then she explained that her memories slowly returned when she was with him. Also, he strongly resembled someone who was very precious to her. After considering it, the young Duke agreed to the condition, especially since his younger brother was also fond of the girl. But first, he wanted to ask for Caleb's opinion to make sure he wasn't against adding this clause. Elia was overjoyed, as if her greatest wish had come true. Afterwards, she left Cedric's office, and the moment she stepped out, it was like she had returned to reality. She just wanted to live a quiet, solitary life and didn't understand why she had done that. Olivia found her looking a little down. She was even worried that something had happened to the lady, as her back was hunched and she was clearly anxious. Elia reassured her that everything was fine and that she just wasn't used to this new place yet. At the same time, she was happy that she would be able to see Caleb from time to time in the future. Meanwhile, Cedric was trying to figure out why Elia had so quickly agreed to the restrictions on her freedom. Just then, his aide appeared again, gushing about how beautiful Lady Elia was. Edwin confessed that he had never seen such mysterious eyes. It was said that only a small fraction of fairies were born with jewel-like eyes. However, Cedric wasn't sure if Elia was a pure-blooded fairy, thinking she was a half-blood. If someone had told Edwin that the fairy lady was a pure-blood, he would have believed it, because not only did she have beautiful eyes, but also gorgeous long hair and a clear, pleasant voice. But then Edwin noticed Duke Cedric's disapproving gaze and shut his mouth, realizing how much he valued Elia. After all, she could be the key to breaking the curse, and Cedric hated it when others touched what was his. The advisor would have to tread carefully now, as he definitely cherished his life. Still, Cedric knew his servant had a point. The girl was outstanding even when she lived in that shack. And if you thought about it, she really did look like a pure-blooded fairy. The Duke didn't know Elia personally, but he sensed that she was emotional and kind-hearted. And she was the complete opposite of him. Cedric still couldn't forget how she had shrieked in surprise and then, like an excited child, agreed to all the terms of the contract. Suddenly, the Duke found himself thinking about the girl too much. Just then, the advisor's voice, like a devil on my shoulder, cut in, pointing out that Cedric had just smiled. Edwin was truly shocked by his boss's smile. He hadn't seen him smile in a long time. To give his aide something to do, he told him to take care of the remaining documents. So Cedric punished him for his big mouth, and then set off to have lunch with Caleb. On the way, the young Duke was thinking that the contract was signed, and now he had to prepare for the wedding. Then his thoughts returned to Elia. He was curious about the floral scent on her, though he probably just imagined it, as the curse had taken away his sense of smell. So it was impossible for him to smell anything. Upon meeting Caleb, Cedric explained that Elia wanted to see him from time to time. After the curse was lifted and they were divorced, he couldn't believe the girl actually wanted to associate with him. He had thought she would have a hard time agreeing before. But that wasn't enough. Caleb was already scheming to keep Elia in the duchy, even after the divorce. For now, he was just playing along, betting he could figure something out later. Then Cedric asked if they could talk about his plans for after the contract expired. He also announced that Caleb would be going back to his etiquette lessons tomorrow, and Elia would be joining him. The lessons themselves were awful, but the addition of Elia lifted his spirits, so he promised to do his best. Cedric found his reaction a bit strange. Caleb looked dejected for some reason. He had expected the boy to be excited, because Elia was coming, but what really made him happy was her request. Cedric just wished his brother would open up and talk about his feelings. Meanwhile, Elia went for a walk in the garden. She loved it here, and the weather was great. She really wanted to walk around here with Caleb, especially since he had promised to show her the entire duchy. At first, Elia wasn't so sure about this place, but now she was happy because everyone seemed nice. She was also curious about what the vassals were like, hoping they wouldn't be judgmental about their marriage. The problem of recovering the real Elia's memories remained, and it needed to be solved soon. Suddenly, the girl overheard the maids chatting excitedly about something. Apparently, the maids hadn't seen Cedric and Caleb have such a pleasant dinner together in a long time. Elia wanted to leave, but then heard that the brothers still felt awkward around each other. Their relationship was good, but for some reason, there was always an uncomfortable atmosphere. Elia found it strange to hear that the brothers had this kind of relationship. In the original story, they were very close. But for some reason, the girl was now starting to think about it seriously. A little while ago, when Elia was getting ready for lunch, she learned that Cedric and Caleb were already eating. Olivia wondered why her lady was dining alone instead of with the master. She just humbly explained that she didn't want to disturb the brothers, as she had heard they often ate together. So she didn't want to interrupt their bonding time. But for some reason, this surprised the maid, and now Elia understood that there was a problem here she knew nothing about. Later, as the girl was walking in the garden, lost in thought, she heard Caleb's voice. They had arranged to meet earlier, and now the boy was rushing towards her. At the same time, he realized it must be hard for her to be here alone, as she wasn't used to the place yet. Elia assured him she was fine, and then asked how his lunch with Cedric was. The boy's reply was full of joy, as if everything had gone just as he wished. This made the girl happy, and now they could take a relaxing walk with the little one. Caleb himself couldn't wait to show Elia everything. They stopped on a stone bridge to admire the view, and Elia was very impressed with the area. Then she spotted a flower on the bank that looked a lot like the sparks they had seen in the forest. The girl put Caleb on her back and was about to rush over for a closer look. Later, they rested for a while on a bench by the fountain. They had a great time all day, and Caleb admitted that he was super happy when he was with Elia. Then he remembered they were going to have etiquette lessons together, and the boy worried that Elia would be disappointed in him when she saw his childish side. She knew he wanted to impress her, but he was still just a child. He also promised not to disappoint her, and that he would try very hard in class. But Elia still didn't quite understand what he meant and asked him to explain. According to him, people won't like you if you're a screw-up. This angered Elia, and she told him not to listen to such stupid prejudices. But Caleb was still worried that Elia would stop liking him if he didn't do his best. Now she understood that someone had deliberately told him these things, even mentioning her name, and little Caleb believed it, thinking that's just how things were. She had a hunch that it was the teacher he had met this morning who told him all this. Seeing the concern on her face, the boy immediately thought she was angry. Just then, she remembered the red marks on his hands and finally figured out how he got them. On top of that, they were making him eat less so he would look good at events. Realizing the teacher was likely the culprit behind everything, Elia told Caleb to listen carefully. But first, she asked him to show her his palms again. Seeing the scars again, she asked him to be honest about whether the teacher hit him with a ruler. She had noticed the scars on the first day they met, and now she understood why he wore gloves. Caleb immediately started making excuses, saying he was punished for not being smart enough. He hid the wounds so people wouldn't see them and be disappointed in him, and he even defended his teacher. Elia realized that Caleb completely trusted his teacher, who didn't even treat him like a human being. To Elia, the way the teacher was instructing the boy was nothing short of brainwashing. She remembered from the novel that Caleb's tutor was Jeriel Babylon, the daughter of Marquis Babylon, who had tried to marry her off to Cedric. But that plan had failed. In the original novel, the young duke had refused the marriage, and the Marquis's intention to marry his daughter off as the curse worsened was very obvious. Then Elia asked Caleb if he had talked to his brother about the etiquette lessons. As she had thought, the boy had kept quiet for fear of disappointing his brother. Moreover, the tutor insisted that Cedric not see the bruises, apparently saying that Caleb would only distract his brother. The tutor also said that Caleb annoyed Cedric at dinner and that he only spoke to him out of obligation. That's why the boy wanted to study harder and put in more effort. Caleb believed his teacher knew what he was lacking, which scared Elia because the boy was simply terrified. But now she suddenly understood that this was the whole reason the brothers' relationship was so bad. Meanwhile, Marquis Reynolds had been using his vassals to frame the young duke, while Jeriel manipulated him by acting caring, and Caleb believed every word she said. The problem was if the brothers got along, it would ruin their plans. So Jeriel made Caleb believe his brother hated him, and the boy began to distance himself from Cedric. And Cedric probably thought his little brother hated him and wanted nothing to do with him. The girl only wished the brothers would open up to each other. She remembered the look on his face when he realized how much Caleb trusted her. The guy was ready to give up the fastest way to break the curse for his brother's sake, even if he knew it. In the original story, Cedric said before he died that he would have been fine if he hadn't cared about Caleb. But because of Jeriel and Reynolds, Caleb couldn't think straight. Elia wanted to fix this somehow, so she knelt beside the boy, took his hands, and asked him why this was happening. She also blamed herself for not noticing sooner that his scars were more than just ordinary scrapes. Then she explained that this method of educating a child was unacceptable and that he shouldn't have to endure it. He shouldn't be punished, nor should he think it was his fault for not knowing certain things. Caleb listened carefully to Elia's words, but he still didn't understand why she was saying this. But she continued, saying that not everything the teacher said was true, and she pleaded with the boy not to fill his head with the nonsense that woman made up. Just because she was chosen in an interview at the ducal house didn't mean she had the right to beat a child. Elia asked Caleb how he felt when the teacher said it was all for his own good, for his future. All the boy could think of was that he wasn't trying hard enough. But Elia wanted to know what emotion truly stirred inside him when he heard the teacher's words. The boy remembered staring at his scarred hands and admitted that it made him sad. He also wondered if what they told him was true, but there was no one to ask. He wanted to go to Cedric, but he was afraid Cedric would hate him even more, and these thoughts kept replaying in Caleb's mind. The boy just didn't want to be hated and felt he had no other choice. Now he was lost, not knowing what to do or even what to believe. Elia listened to Caleb and looked at his face, her heart aching to know the boy had been through so much. Now he confessed that he just wanted to believe her, and he was on the verge of tears as he said it. She stroked his hair and told him to believe in himself more. If he did that, he could do anything and wouldn't have to be afraid of anything. Her words hit the boy like some kind of spell, and he couldn't hold back his tears any longer. They stayed in the garden until Caleb calmed down, and then she walked him back to his room. On the way back to her own room, Elia felt a surge of anger towards the Marquis and his daughter. She wanted to smear them on the walls. She even imagined herself barging in like a thug and showing those bastards what's what. She was so lost in thought that she didn't immediately hear Cedric calling her name. He was just curious why she and Caleb had stayed out so late and what she thought of the castle. The sudden situation left Elia too shocked to speak for a moment, but she remembered Caleb's request not to tell his brother just yet. He wanted to tell him himself. He was just scared. So she just said they had so much fun they lost track of time, and she had just put him to bed. Just then, she noticed the young master was looking at her with a strange expression. She immediately apologized for taking up so much of his brother's time, though she was thinking that maybe Cedric should spend a little more time with the boy. Besides, she had to prepare for tomorrow's etiquette class, and the first order of business was to separate Jeriel and Reynolds and find a way to fire that teacher. If the daughter of the vassal Babylon was fired, it would cause an uproar and disrupt their plans. But it was the fastest way to save Caleb from the brainwashing. Elia was ready to throw down like never before. She was furious that someone was bullying this little guy, and before she left this duchy, she was going to make sure Jeriel's stench was completely gone from this place. The next morning, Elia went to class after Olivia helped her get ready. On the way, the girl hoped everything would go as smoothly as possible. She had racked her brain all night for this, but still hadn't figured out how to get rid of Jeriel. So far, Elia could only see one way to fire that scum without revealing Caleb's situation. Her plan was called Operation Use Cedric. Elia hoped to find some fault in the first lesson so she could complain to the master. That way, Cedric would doubt Jeriel's competence and start looking for another tutor. This way, Elia could easily get rid of Jeriel. But this was her only plan for now, and if it failed, Elia couldn't think of any alternatives. She was even envious of other novel heroines who could solve problems by improvising. We have to be smart about this, because we can't just go and beat Jeriel up, even though I really want to. Elia found the situation very tricky, but she was confident that everything would work out. When she arrived at the classroom, Caleb greeted her and asked if she had a good breakfast. The girl nodded, noticing that he had slept well. Still, she was worried about him, hoping that he no more having to endure that kind of bullying. Just then, a servant announced that Gerald, the daughter of Marquis Babylon, had arrived. Elia tensed up, but ready to face this scum head-on. She ordered for her to be let in. Gerald walked in and greeted her students with the most proper etiquette. There was no trace on her face of ever having harmed a child. What Elia saw was completely different from what she had imagined. The lady immediately began to shower the future Duchess with praise, even saying her voice was incredibly gentle. Then, Gerald began the lesson, and Elia's task was to learn how to walk correctly. But first, the teacher asked her to walk around the room as she normally would. The girl was even a little depressed that Gerald was actually teaching like a proper instructor. To her further surprise, the Marquis's daughter even praised her gait. Elia realized that if things continued like this, her plan would be impossible to carry out. But she quickly figured that there had to be an ulterior motive behind the teacher's unsolicited kindness. Looking at that smiling face, Elia wanted even more to slap it, but she held back. The second lesson and the third were the same. Gerald taught impeccably, and her teaching ability was beyond question. Elia eagerly waited for her to drop her mask so she could kick her out, but the Marquis's daughter suddenly became serious with her, turning to the lady once more. She said bluntly that Elia wasn't learning from her mistakes and was a poor learner, adding that if the lady continued this way, the young master would be very disappointed. The girl didn't understand why Gerald brought up Cedric, but it was clearly the beginning of some serious brainwashing. Gerald kept emphasizing that Lady Elia had to look flawless at the wedding. Then she promised she could make it happen as long as she was trusted completely, and that this was all for Elia's own good. Just then, Elia realized this viper was trying to scheme against her. Right in my trap. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived, and now she could proceed to the next stage. Gerald didn't just dislike this new student, she absolutely loathed her. When her father announced she would be teaching some nobody, she completely lost control. But the Marquis couldn't stop it, as it was an order from the Duke. Gerald's mother kept saying it would help her become the Duchess faster, but she still threw a fit. They had followed the order without even asking for her opinion. She said, almost in tears, that she didn't go to the academy just to teach some commoner. Her parents tried endlessly to placate her. They promised that if she just held on, the ducal house would soon be theirs, and told her not to worry about Caleb, as he already trusted her completely. So it wouldn't be a problem. They couldn't figure out how Elia had gotten the boy on her side so quickly. They figured she couldn't do much anyway, and they could always find a way to get rid of her. Meaning, even if a commoner was elevated, you could always find fault with them. Now Gerald had to become the perfect Marquis's daughter, so she could manipulate the girl. The Marchioness agreed, but she was a little worried, though she felt it wouldn't be too difficult to pull off. But she didn't expect that Elia knew everything and had already started her own game. As they were discussing Elia's progress, she confessed that she had spoken to the Duke about her shortcomings. She also worried that since she was just a commoner, people would judge her for the difference in status. She also admitted that Cedric had found her in the flower field afterward and said something to her. He didn't care about her status or abilities, nor did he pay any mind to what others thought. Cedric told Elia to just be herself, because he fell in love with her just the way she was. Elia just kept repeating Cedric's confession out loud. Seeing Gerald's expression, she added that compared to love, status, and power were worthless. But the teacher forced a smile, confused as to why the girl wasn't falling for her tricks. She had already tried everything to embarrass the commoner, so she would decide to leave on her own. Meanwhile, Elia was gloating internally because Gerald had fallen into her own trap, and now she was curious to see how things would unfold. Another bonus was that Caleb was completely absorbed in his book and hadn't heard a thing. With that in mind, Elia felt they could wrap up the walking lesson. She waited for the Marquis's daughter's reaction, a triumphant smile on her face. Suddenly, Gerald announced that they would now move on to a deeper level of study. The Marquis's daughter even smiled, but it was a sinister one. Afterward, Gerald brought Elia some high-heeled shoes, explaining that she needed to learn how to walk in them. To the girl, it felt like some kind of hellish ordeal, but she understood that Gerald was just trying to prove to her that she was useless. Despite this, she feigned interest, believing she could at least take a few steps without breaking her neck. Even before her rebirth, Elia rarely wore high heels, and putting these on made her knees tremble. After she took a few steps, Gerald told her to walk a little faster. She was probably waiting for Elia to fall, but Elia believed in herself. But then she felt something was wrong, as if there was another trick to this whole thing. Sure enough, on the next step, the heel started to come off. Elia naturally lost her balance and fell, while Gerald pretended to be extremely concerned for her. Now the girl completely understood the Marquis's daughter's plan. She had likely broken the heel on purpose, which could have resulted in a broken leg. Elia wanted to teach her a good lesson, as her patience was running out. But the Marquis's daughter immediately crouched beside her and began to wail, pretending she couldn't believe the shoe was broken. It was the maid who had prepared the shoes, and Gerald couldn't believe she would make such a mistake. Then she promised to punish the servant, as it was her responsibility. Elia was about to argue when Caleb ran over, saw what happened, and began to worry terribly for her. He then demanded they stop for the day and go to her room to treat her wounds. Surprisingly, even Gerald agreed to stop for the day, wearing an expression of deep sorrow as she told Lady Elia to get some rest. But she knew those emotions were completely fake. Nevertheless, she was confident she could handle any scheme the bitch had in store for her and drive her away. She could have dealt with her on the spot, but decided to play it smarter, and her leg was also a bit numb. Later, a doctor was brought to Elia, and her leg was indeed a little scraped. But her bones were all fine. It was just a minor abrasion. The doctor gave her an ointment to help the skin heal faster and told her to make sure the wound didn't get infected. Caleb was still worried about whether Elia was okay, and she assured him there was nothing to worry about. She noticed Caleb seemed a bit embarrassed, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. So she asked him to sit by her bed. He then apologized to her because he had another lesson and had to leave. The boy promised to come back right after his class and told her to rest well. Once outside, Caleb stood at the door for a moment, as if brewing a plan. What happened to Elia was tearing him up inside. He liked her and was very worried about her. He hoped she would be better by the next lesson because he didn't want to be alone with that teacher again. Meanwhile, Olivia came to visit Elia, admitting she was very worried after hearing she had fallen. But the maid was even more shocked when she found out Caleb had tried to pick Elia up. Olivia told Elia to take the day off and to call her if she needed anything. The girl said she was fine, but it made her happy to know everyone was concerned for her. After telling the maid she was going to rest, Elia secretly celebrated that she had done a good job today. Still, it angered her that the damn Marquis's daughter had made Caleb worry. It turned out this teacher was a bit unhinged, so Elia decided to tell Cedric what had happened. Gerald Babylon came from a very wealthy family, and she always got her way. She got everything she wanted but still craved more. Judging by her behavior, it was clear that all the members of the Marquis's family were cut from the same cloth. Then an idea came to Elia, and she had Olivia invite the etiquette teacher to see her. Gerald arrived without delay and, upon entering, began to fuss over the lady's injury. She tried hard to show sincere concern, and her acting was decent. But that wasn't what Elia wanted to talk about, so she asked the maid to leave them alone for a moment. Gerald realized something was off, but she didn't show it. After they were alone, she was still smiling as she asked why she had been summoned. She began by saying, "I did not punish the maid as Lady Elia might have wished. I even praised you as an angel for forgiving the maid's mistake. But we both know full well that the maid is innocent. She didn't break those shoes." Just then, Elia sat up straight and, with a serious expression, told Gerald to stop acting, that there was no need to smile and pretend to be friendly like that. Since it was just the two of them in the room, the Marquis's daughter agreed, finally letting the expression drop from her face. Then she said that she didn't know how Elia came to the ducal estate, but pointed out that the Babylon family had great influence here. Elia shouldn't think she was someone important, because here she was considered a nobody. After all, people like her get carried away with a little bit of power. But Elia wanted to know something else, why Gerald acted as if she didn't care about little Caleb at all. But she felt no guilt, as she was convinced she was doing it for the future of the Grand Duke. Now she was angry that Lady Elia had shown up, because everything had been going smoothly before she came and ruined everything. Gerald didn't believe Elia was just supporting Caleb. After all, she had known him since he was a baby. She couldn't understand why Elia thought she knew the boy better than anyone. Caleb trusted Gerald more than anyone, and she demanded the lady accept that fact. Elia didn't argue that Caleb had been with her for a relatively short time. Besides, his backstory wasn't detailed in the novel, but she was learning about the boy's life now. She berated herself for her initial careless thoughts. The little guy was surrounded by so much trash, and in that situation, he became the Grand Duke on his own. Elia knew she would eventually have to leave the ducal estate, but for now, she would stay by his side. In the meantime, she was going to teach these bastards a lesson they would never forget. Now, standing face to face with the Marquis's daughter, the girl decided to make her move. With a sweet, cold smile, she declared that Gerald looked incredibly ugly. She wanted the scum to feel what her victims felt. In that moment, Gerald broke down, her emotions getting the better of her, and she snarled at Elia, calling her a low-born wench. Elia just gave her a surprised look and asked if this was an etiquette lesson. The Marquis's daughter reacted exactly as Elia had hoped. Being insulted by a commoner was hard to ignore. The lady continued to lecture the teacher, saying that a noble should always be mindful of their words and actions. This made Gerald grit her teeth so hard she could have ground them to dust. Then she let out a scream and swung at the girl who dared to lecture her, but she failed to connect as Elia caught her hand. Of course, she remembered all the moves from her past life, and now she stunned the Marquis's daughter with her strength. Elia reminded Gerald of what she had said, that their plans had fallen apart since she appeared, and promised she would continue to mess things up because Caleb didn't deserve this kind of treatment. Just then, Cedric's voice rang out as he walked in, and both girls turned at the same time. The Duke was with Caleb and his aide, Edwin. It seemed the child had run to get the adults. Gerald immediately put on the face of an innocent victim, hoping the master would take her side and claim that Lady Elia had suddenly grabbed her. This, of course, shocked Elia. But then Caleb spoke to the daughter of Marquis, Babylon, announcing in a commanding tone that she no longer worked here, and then demanded she get out immediately. Elia was even more shocked than before, while Gerald was completely bewildered, not understanding why things had turned out this way. So she began to beg the young master to explain why he was firing her, swearing she had done nothing wrong. The Marquis's daughter hadn't expected this from the child who had always been on her side. Now she stood there with a crazed look on her face, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Just then, Caleb took off his glove, revealing his scars, and said that the teacher should understand the basis for his decision. Not wanting to hear another word from her, he once again demanded she leave the ducal estate immediately. Gerald concluded that Elia had somehow brainwashed the boy, and now her years of effort had gone down the drain. Then she began to justify herself to Cedric, saying it was just a small punishment for the boy not mastering his lessons. She started begging for an explanation, but Elia pointed out that no reason justified a teacher resorting to violence. The Marquis's daughter started to argue again, saying a commoner wouldn't understand how to raise a noble. Elia was so fed up with the Marquis's daughter's pathetic excuses that she decided to knock her out with a single punch. But Cedric pulled her to his side, letting her know she shouldn't waste her time on such trash. Gerald saw a glimmer of hope in this, thinking the master was finally going to stand up for her. But he didn't. He just gave her a grim warning that there would be consequences for hurting someone close to him. Now, the Marquis's daughter needed to get lost, and her father would have a talk with her later, at home. But she wasn't going to give up, demanding proof of what she did, since the young master's wounds and her broken heel were obviously not direct evidence. Gerald was sure they couldn't prove her guilt with just that. Just then, her voice echoed through the room, as if someone had pressed play on a recording. The recording clearly showed the teacher belittling the child, constantly saying he wasn't good enough and that Lord Cedric would not be proud of him because of it. The recording came from a magic orb held by the aide, Edwin, and it even showed an image of Gerald hitting the boy's palm as punishment. Edwin had specifically brought this magic orb, which Caleb had prepared in advance. Now everyone could clearly hear and see what the etiquette lessons were really like. Caleb himself was satisfied. He had finally opened his eyes and decided to make this psycho teacher get the punishment she deserved. After talking with Elia in the garden, he couldn't believe it right away, but he really liked her. But Gerald's face always appeared in his mind, and he believed that if he just studied hard, she wouldn't hit him. But when Elia got hurt, the boy realized something was wrong and decided to tell his brother everything. Caleb found Cedric, but he still couldn't get a word out. It was as if Gerald was still whispering in his ear that his brother would be disappointed. The child was afraid that Cedric would really hate him even more. But his brother noticed him just standing there, trembling like a leaf, and went over to wrap him in a blanket. Cedric Cedric started asking him what was wrong, but Caleb was too scared to even make a sound. The terrified look in his eyes showed that something terrible had happened. Cedric had his younger brother sit on the sofa and asked Edwin to bring 10 more blankets. The child felt the same warmth as when he was at Elia's house, and he realized his brother actually cared about him. This gave him the courage to tell him everything. Now they all stood in the room, and Cedric told them to stop the viewing, as he had understood the situation. Elia was sweating nervously, wondering if Caleb was okay after everything he had been through. But then she saw him smile, and she knew he would be all right. The problem was, it wasn't over. Gerald wasn't going to go down without a fight. She had to remind everyone that she was from the Babylon family, and they were not to be trifled with. Knowing this bitch was going to see it through to the bitter end, Elia's knuckles itched to rearrange her face again. But a look from Cedric stopped her, warning her not to lose control. So she told Gerald that she should be grateful to be standing there, because her hands were barely restraining themselves from gouging out her eyes. But then Caleb grabbed her hand and told her everything was all right. Just then, Cedric interjected, saying that the Babylon family's reputation was indeed well-deserved, and for that very reason, the family needed to set an example for all. Otherwise, within a month, this whole incident would be the talk of the duchy, and even the entire capital. Then they would decide whether to expel Gerald from the family. After that, Cedric had Edwin take Elia out for some fresh air. Meanwhile, Gerald's face was dark as thunder, realizing her family's reputation was about to be ruined. She thought she had been so seamless, and she blamed everything on Elia's arrival for messing it all up. Later, Elia could finally breathe a sigh of relief that it was over. She couldn't forget the look on the Marquis's daughter's face, as if everything was her fault, but she was glad she had handled it well. Now, as she left the room with Cedric and Caleb, her fiancé thanked her for everything she had done. Because if it weren't for her, Caleb would still be suffering the Marquis's daughter's abuse. But now they had sorted everything out. The girl humbly explained that she hadn't done anything, which was mostly true. It was mainly the brothers who had teamed up against the scoundrel. However, Cedric was fully convinced that Elia deserved all the credit, because if it weren't for her, he would still be in the dark, and his younger brother would still be bullied. Now the Duke simply didn't know how to thank the girl. Meanwhile, she was just thrilled that the brothers had finally talked things out and believed everything would be all right. Suddenly, Cedric apologized to Elia for his rudeness, but she had no idea what he was talking about. Then she remembered when she was about to rearrange the Marquis's daughter's teeth, he had pulled her to his side. Cedric did it so that the vassals bought by the Marquis wouldn't dare try to pin any blame on Elia. The Duke also promised that any physical contact he had with her would only happen with her consent. But Elia didn't mind. He hadn't meant anything by it. Then she noticed Caleb, who looked happier than anyone at that moment, and she was happy for him too. The girl was glad the boy had believed her story. Now, no villain could stop him from becoming the Grand Duke. She just hoped the boy could always smile like that. The only thing that bothered her was her lost memories. If she had those memories, everything would be perfect. Then Cedric prepared to return to his office and told Lady Elia to get some rest. For a moment, their eyes met, and it felt as if the moment stretched into eternity. Cedric came to his senses first and apologized again for his rudeness. Then he unexpectedly grabbed a lock of her hair that was hanging over her shoulder. Elia was confused at first. Perhaps something was stuck in her hair. But the Duke brought her hair to his face and smelled it. This was completely unexpected. She was speechless, not knowing what to say. Cedric explained that he just wanted to confirm something and asked if Elia used perfume. Elia admitted she had never bought such a thing, still not understanding her fiancé's intentions. Their conversation was interrupted by Caleb, who walked over again, also grabbing a lock of Elia's hair and smelling it. That moment, he reminded her of Yunhee. When she had visited him in the hospital, she had used a deodorant and the scent had gotten into her hair. At first, she didn't understand why her brother was smelling her hair, but then a nurse explained everything. Now Elia didn't mind the Duke smelling her hair, as long as everything was peaceful. Later, on her way home, Gerald couldn't believe this had happened to her. The whole way, she cursed the girl who had ruined all her plans in just a few days. Gerald also couldn't believe Cedric would fall for a commoner, as if she were some kind of witch. Now, because of her, the Marquis's family might be completely expelled. After Cedric returned, a council of vassals was formed to discuss the exile of Marquis Babylon. Naturally, the families bought by the Marquis opposed his banishment, but But those who had been oppressed by him seized the opportunity, throwing out every argument they could think of, calling him a traitor. The vassals accused each other, shouting loudly, and the scene was chaotic. At that meeting, Cedric was just glad he had listened to Elia and left Caleb at home this time. He knew there was no way to get rid of the Babylon family, but he could gradually weaken its influence to ensure that something similar would never happen again. Later, Marquis Reunite was sprawled out on his favorite armchair, relieved that he had been spared from exile. His wife supported him as best she could, glad that this whole mess was finally over. They probably should have kept a low profile for a while, but the Marquis wasn't going to let it go and was planning to appeal. They were blood relatives of the former Grand Duchess, and if they were exiled, we would have to take care of them. That's why Reunite was sure that Cedric would at least consider his appeal. But a little later, when he saw that Cedric had returned the letter directly, he completely lost it. The wax seal on the envelope wasn't even broken, which meant the Duke hadn't even bothered to read it. This drove the Marquis mad, as he was the head of their mother's side of the family. Then, he found that another letter had arrived from the duchy. Cedric had expected the Marquis to ask for a reduced sentence, but told him to use this time more wisely. He also told him that he should be glad he didn't get a heavier sentence, and now the Marquis was forbidden from leaving the estate. For the entire week after that, Reunite went completely crazy, flipping over everything he could get his hands on. After finally catching his breath, he started cursing Cedric for daring to go against a true nobleman. The Marquis hated the Duke and his future bride, vowing to make their lives a living hell. A week after Gerald was fired, the atmosphere in the duchy had completely changed. Arya was enjoying her life, always taking walks in the garden, while Caleb found several new teachers whom he liked as soon as he met them. The young master used to be very withdrawn, so it was great to see him open up like this. Even the maid, Olivia, was happy to see the child so relaxed. There was no more sadness on his face, and he chatted with his new teachers like they were old friends. Arya noticed the huge changes in Caleb, and they made her very happy, because when they first met, he was cold and quiet, never mentioning anything that hurt him. In this respect, the girl felt the brothers were a bit similar. But she suddenly realized that she didn't know Cedric at all, and most of the information she had came from Caleb. The novel didn't really describe him properly, and he himself hardly ever talked about himself. Arya felt it was strange to know nothing about each other, even if it was just a contract marriage. Later, she met with Cedric to discuss some wedding matters, but there were still a lot of details to be worked out. Now, Arya had to deal with buying outfits, which was exhausting her. She decided to change things up, remembering that the wedding banquet would feature the newlyweds' favorite dishes, so she declared that she could very well make the dishes herself. But to do that, she needed to know what Cedric liked, so she could make everything he wanted to eat. The Duke admitted he wasn't a picky eater and would eat whatever Arya liked, though he didn't seem too excited about it, adding that it was too late for him to think about favorite foods now. Because of the curse, his 5 senses were slowly becoming numb. The girl was clearly stunned by this news. Realizing he hadn't said that quite right, Cedric explained that his senses were dulling, as if they were falling asleep. He could no longer taste or smell anything, so eating was not a pleasure for him. So Arya could just list the dishes she liked, since everyone knew about the Duke's curse anyway. Arya remembered that was true, a curse that left one not dead, but not truly alive either, and nothing could awaken them. Cedric had only lost his sense of taste for now, but the girl still felt no relief. The Duke noticed the strange expression on Arya's face and started to worry. But she then remembered him asking if she wore perfume and wondered what that meant. It was a mystery to Cedric, too, who had been smelling all sorts of things for years and felt nothing. Nothing. And yet he could clearly smell Arya, which left her completely at a loss. He found it strange because he couldn't even smell strong tea, and yet he could smell Arya very clearly. She guessed it was because she was the one who cast the curse, and that could be a problem. Arya was terrified, afraid the Duke would find out the truth. Then, with a crash, thunder and lightning heightened the tension, and she was nearly scared out of her wits. Neither of them knew why the storm had come on so suddenly, but Cedric was starting to get an idea. Just then, Caleb's voice came from the other side of the room, startling Arya again. The boy stood nonchalantly in the doorway, then happily announced that it was raining and asked Arya to make him potato pancakes. Just like in the cottage, Cedric was completely baffled, while Arya just remembered saying that potato pancakes were usually made on rainy days. Just a few minutes ago, the sun had been blazing, and Caleb was in a separate study. He was doing his homework and finished much faster than he thought he would. He was bored out of his mind, not knowing what to do, and Arya had been busy with wedding preparations lately. She even slipped away after dinner, though she was really just trying not to disturb the brothers. Suddenly, the boys started craving the food Arya made when it was just the two of them in the cottage. While in the forest, Caleb had lived on potato soup, and he was also a huge fan of those potato pancakes. But since they were only made when it rained, he was out of luck now, as it was sunny outside. Suddenly, Caleb had a nagging doubt, because Arya said she didn't remember anything about her past, except that she did remember making potato pancakes for someone. Although she might remember something while cooking, and if her memory fully returned, she would go back to her own place. This made Caleb sad, and he wanted to spend more time with her while she was here. And just a few minutes later, a storm broke out, and Caleb appeared at her door, asking for potato pancakes. The girl was actually a little happy, as it changed the subject between her and Cedric. She was glad for the boy's visit, though she didn't understand how he could have shown up so perfectly on cue, and promised she would be happy to show off her cooking skills again. Caleb also noticed his brother hadn't had much of an appetite lately, and asked him to join them for potato pancakes. Arya realized Caleb didn't know about Cedric's dulled senses yet, but she decided not to rush things herself. And the boy swore that as soon as his brother saw the potato pancakes, he would suddenly get an appetite. Damn, now I want some potato pancakes too. Arya headed to the kitchen and quickly made their order, while the ducal brothers waited at the dining table. The head chef had never made anything like it before, but he felt it would require a lot of oil. Arya insisted that the potato pancakes would be tastier deep-fried, though the head chef had never even heard of deep frying. So she explained that when you fry something in a lot of oil, you get a super crispy crust. She was glad the head chef wasn't upset that she had pushed him aside at the stove. Soon, the dish was ready, and Arya placed it on the table dramatically. The potato pancakes were a slightly different shape this time, but Caleb was still drooling and couldn't wait to try them. Arya suggested they eat them with a dipping sauce this time, and wished the brothers a good meal. As soon as Caleb took his first bite, he was completely blown away by the taste. He thought it tasted even better than the last time he had it. He kept urging Cedric to try it while it was hot, or else Caleb would eat every last crumb. The Duke stared at the potato pancake as if it were something alien, and since he couldn't taste it anyway, he felt there was no point. But Arya knew it must be hard for him to force himself. Cedric noticed the worried look on her face, and told her not to worry, especially since he was used to this kind of reaction by now. Still, Arya felt embarrassed knowing this was all because of her, which made her want him to regain his memory even faster. Then, Cedric put a piece of the pancake in his mouth, and suddenly his expression completely changed. A strange sound came from his throat, which really scared Arya and Caleb. The girl was especially afraid that her fiancé had been poisoned, or at least was choking. They started scrambling around Cedric, completely clueless as to what was happening. The chef blurted out at the worst possible moment that the food was poisoned, but Caleb scolded him since he himself was fine. Poor Arya was in a panic, with pure terror written all over her face. She wanted to call a doctor, but Cedric stopped everyone in their tracks and announced that nothing bad had happened and they had just misunderstood. Then his face lit up as if he'd won the lottery, admitting that he hadn't been able to taste food in a long time. But a completely shocked Arya still couldn't process it. It turned out he could taste now. Caleb chimed in, realizing that his brother couldn't taste food, which meant the curse was getting worse. Cedric apologized to his younger brother for not telling him sooner. But Caleb told him not to apologize, just to never hide something like that from him again. Arya was glad the two were having a proper conversation, as they had never shown any emotion to each other before, although she was now completely unable to focus on anything. Caleb was curious as to why his brother could suddenly taste again. Cedric didn't know how to explain it, but Arya suspected it was because she had made it, since she was the one who cast the curse. She hoped Cedric wouldn't find out she was a siren, but regardless, she now held the key to breaking the curse. Suddenly, Cedric turned his attention to Arya. Lost in her own thoughts, she was scared half to death again. It turned out the Duke just wanted another serving, and her soul returned to her body. Later that evening, before bed, Arya took a bath and was lost in thought. She felt exhausted because she had been under so much stress lately. Even the maid, Olivia, noticed her mistress was completely listless, but she was very grateful to Arya though Arya didn't know why. According to Olivia, the atmosphere around the castle had completely changed since Arya came to the duchy. Arya herself remembered thinking the place was a dump when she first arrived, quiet and gloomy. But after Arya's arrival, many people felt warmth in the castle for the first time. Olivia never thought she'd see Cedric and Caleb chatting happily like they did today. The maid noticed that the boy had changed a lot, and so had his brother. Cedric's expression had really softened, and today, Olivia, like the other maids, saw him smile for the first time. Olivia thought love was the reason he was acting this way, and was happy that her master could experience it. Arya, on the other hand, knew it was just a contract marriage and didn't think she deserved any credit. Knowing she was the reason for Cedric's predicament, it was very difficult for her to even smile. After the maid left, she started replaying everything that had happened. Now she would have to make Cedric his favorite food from time to time, but that didn't scare her. Meanwhile, Cedric was relaxing in his room, gazing at the night sky. He remembered how the thunderstorm had stopped out of nowhere as they were walking back from the kitchen. Cedric already had a slight suspicion that the little rascal was somehow behind the storm, and now he was even more certain. Their family did possess that kind of magic, one that could control the weather. There was no doubt that it was Caleb who had changed the weather this time. But that kind of magic drains your energy, and many had tried to use it and failed. No one had been able to master the thing for over 100 years, and damn Cedric had brought it back when he was 18. He tried to teach Caleb, but the guy just couldn't get it. Although his older brother believed he could totally unleash this magic, the boy doubted himself, feeling he didn't have his brother's talent. So he kept messing up. Caleb wanted to give it all up, convinced he would fail like half of his family. Eventually, Cedric stopped forcing his brother to learn the magic. Now he wondered how on earth Caleb had managed to summon a thunderstorm that lasted for hours. Then it occurred to him that the boy could use magic even with an injured arm. And now, after repeated failures, he excelled at weather magic. Cedric found this super strange, but one thing was certain. The Duke noticed that all these changes started happening after he met Arya. He had been investigating her background, but couldn't find a single thing about her or her family. The fact that Cedric could only smell her was just too bizarre. This girl was clearly an enigma wrapped in a mystery. It was at that moment that the Duke desperately wanted to know who this girl really was. The next morning, Arya looked out the window and saw that the weather was practically inviting her for a walk. And she also had to pick a spot in the garden for lunch, as the three of them were going to eat outside this time. She suddenly realized that thinking about food brought her a sense of calm. Everything had been a mess lately, but now that the wedding date was set, things were moving along quite smoothly. But there was still something bothering her, and that was the novel's heroine, Daphne Merlinist. Arya also thought that if she broke Cedric's curse, Caleb wouldn't fall to darkness, and he wouldn't become an enemy of the Merlinist royal family. But what kind of future would Daphne have then? Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, a blue-haired girl named Daphne was taking a walk in the garden. Just then, the young prince spotted her and immediately started complimenting her beauty. The prince's name was Renoir de Parisio Jatipsia Present. He was on rather good terms with the young Duchess Daphne Merlinist. They always hung out in the garden, and the prince was always showering her with compliments. He also liked to smell her hair, which was apparently a completely normal thing to do in this empire. So this time, they were about to start their small talk when the prince was suddenly called away. Daphne promised to wait for him, secretly glad that compared to before her rebirth, she was actually happy now. To be honest, she was already a little tired of being with the 6-year-old prince, because she felt so much older. Yes, she was 6 again now, but that was only because she had returned to the past after dying at 16, so she was reliving her 6-year-old days. This was a world where magic was like breathing, taken for granted. But before her rebirth, Daphne couldn't even handle basic magic. That's why everyone was skeptical about her lineage, as magic was passed down through the family. Her father, Duke Calvados Merlinist, of course, quelled the gossip. But he didn't teach Daphne any magic because he had no expectations for her. And Calvados only showed up to quell the rumors, which only made her feel worse. After a while, there was a banquet to celebrate Prince Renoir's birthday. Everyone at the party seemed to be very happy and having a great time, but the prince stepped out onto the terrace for a moment, and a cloaked siren appeared before him. It was then that Renoir let his guard down, and the siren placed a curse on him. Daphne, the girl everyone said couldn't protect her family, happened to be nearby, so they naturally pinned the blame on her, and she immediately became public enemy number one and was sentenced to death. Daphne was scheduled to be executed in prison as soon as she came of age. Marchioness Girial visited her in person and didn't even pretend to feel sorry for the girl. The Marchioness complained about wasting so much time on her, only for it to amount to nothing. Girial berated Daphne for not using her magic and sacrificing herself. After that, the girl believed it was her fault and that she was destined to never receive her father's love. After a while, Calvados showed up in person, and Daphne hoped he would get her out. It turned out the girl was right. Her father couldn't imagine his daughter being executed, so he helped her escape from prison. She ran through the forest in the dead of night, having to make a run for it. Her father told her to run as far as she could, saying there would be no knights on the road, but he had to stay behind. Daphne still didn't understand why he would suddenly decide to help her like this. In fact, Calvados just wanted his daughter to live a happy life as she pleased. So the girl ran, ecstatic that her father hadn't given up on her. But at the same time, tears of pain streamed down her face at the thought of leaving her family behind. She ran for a long time, the moon being the only light to guide her, and the forest was dead silent, as if there wasn't even a single animal. She paused for a moment. The urge to go back to her father was overwhelming, but she knew they would execute her anyway, and that would break his heart. So she kept running. Daphne realized that her father had dealt with the rumors so that she could live freely. He wanted his daughter to escape far away. Far, far away. Now sitting at the table, Daphne recalled trying to escape, but a chasm blocked her path, and she nearly fell in. Behind her, she heard the knights who had been sent to hunt her down. The girl glanced back awkwardly, slipped, and fell into the abyss, straight to her death. She thought it was all over then, and now she couldn't believe she had been given a second chance by being reborn. Daphne wanted to live a normal life, and started thinking about how to stop the siren from appearing at the banquet, although she knew she couldn't actually stop her. For some inexplicable reason, the siren appeared 10 years earlier this time. Daphne used the mirror shield magic she had never learned, just hoping to get lucky. This magic summons a shield made of mirrors that can reflect any magic or curse. And it was the only thing that could block a siren's magic. The reason the current imperial family is where it is today is because of a rebellion 200 years ago when the emperor was a siren. The current or present family started the rebellion, and they possessed the powerful mirror shield magic, which helped them succeed. The Merlinist family came from a branch of the present family, which is why Daphne could use this magic. Before her rebirth, she was transported to the Temple of Knowledge, where she unconsciously mastered the mirror shield magic. As she was thinking about all this, the prince returned to her, explaining that they had to part ways for the day. Daphne knew that Renoir also had to learn this magic. Meanwhile, the imperial family was trying to distance themselves from her. They thought the girl might mess up Renoir's plans to become crown prince. And because she also possessed the mirror shield magic, they might think she wanted to contend for the throne. Daphne had been reading the papers to see what kind of consequences she had caused. Then one day, she saw a report about some mess involving the Indigentia family and the daughter of the Marquis of Babylon. Anyway, all eyes were on the ducal family now because of Cedric's upcoming wedding. Daphne noticed an awkward expression on the bride-to-be's face, but she also noticed her silver hair with pink highlights and her jewel-like eyes. That kind of hair was very rare, and usually only sirens had it. It was then that Daphne suddenly realized that while she had blocked one siren's spell, Cedric had somehow been hit by another. But there was nothing she could do to help the Duke. Suddenly, Daphne spotted a figure in a dark cloak with a huge hood outside the carriage window. This person was reaching out to the little girl, who was immediately enveloped in light, and she knew something terrible was happening. Meanwhile, Caleb was thrilled that they could finally eat together as a family. The boy was also happy that his brother could finally taste food again. Cedric seemed much calmer because of it, and Arya was glad she could help a little with his curse. She remembered Olivia saying she had noticed he had changed and now actually smiled. Just as their dinner was going perfectly, Edwin suddenly appeared. His interrupting dinner meant something big had happened. He approached the Duke and reported that someone was asking to see him. Cedric's face turned to ice, which unsettled Arya. But she herself felt a jolt of fear when Edwin announced that Princess Merlinist had been kidnapped and that they didn't know who had taken her for now. The news of the kidnapping had clearly upset the Duke, and Arya was so terrified that she even screamed at the table, the news hitting her that hard. Even Edwin was a little concerned, but right now he was more worried about the future Duchess's mental state. He thought Arya knew Daphne, and not wanting to blow her cover, Arya said that any kidnapping case was disturbing. In truth, the reason she was worried was because the whole thing felt too, just like in the original story. After Daphne returned and lifted the curse, a fairy suddenly appeared and tried to kidnap her. The fairy lashed out in a rage, but the plan failed, and he ended up in the royal prison. The plot was identical to the original, except this time it wasn't Elia who kidnapped Daphne. Since the plot matches the original so closely, does that mean our girl isn't Elia? However, it's possible for two people to have the same name and a similar appearance. She guessed that she might have a long-lost twin sister. If things continued to develop as they did in the original, then the only way to lift Cedric's curse would disappear. The girl glanced at her fiancé, a look of pure fear on her face. He started to ask her what was wrong, but she just brushed it off, saying she was thinking about something else. Then she asked him the exact location where Miss Mariniest was kidnapped and learned that it happened on her way back to the duchy from the Imperial Palace. That was all the information they had on the case for now. Elia noticed Caleb was lost in thought, his face full of displeasure. Although the boy understood the situation, he didn't understand why his brother needed to get involved. In her opinion, such a thought was rather mean and selfish. However, she understood the boy's reaction. He had just heard a name he didn't want to hear. So, Duke Marinist formally asked all the great families for help, requesting their assistance, except for the Indigentia family, as their family magic was not suitable for searches and investigations. Family magic can only be used by family members. And that's it. Some can turn into dogs, while others use psychometry to work as detectives. Gravity magic didn't fit in with these, which is why these families weren't considered powerful. There was also the Meshalata family, who used material magic. Only 3 families, Meshalata, Marinist, and Indigentia, were allowed into the Temple of Knowledge. All secrets were kept there, and you could find out the deepest secrets of any family if you wanted to. Thus, the 3 families kept each other in check, but only the Meshalata family submitted a request. Suddenly, Elia noticed Cedric's face had become very angry, and she began to worry. He thought they needed to verify the intelligence that the 2 families had begun to cooperate. The reason Cedric was cursed was that Princess Daphne had protected the prince. Even so, he had always maintained a good relationship with the Marina's family. His injury while protecting the prince was a pure accident, so Cedric never even asked for compensation. Now the Duke suspected they might be hiding a similar secret, just like him. He then ordered Edwin to send people to the capital to investigate the matter thoroughly, warning that all our actions must be carried out quietly. Just as Cedric and his brother were discussing their next move, Elia stopped them. She declared that they must act preemptively. Intelligence could be leaked, so they had to control the situation and offer their help proactively. Cedric still had his doubts, while Elia began to think about how to convince him. If it was really a fairy who kidnapped Daphne, they might lose their chance to save Cedric, as there would be no one left to lift his curse. So, Elia asked her future husband to go to the capital with her, as she wanted to check the situation for herself. A short time later, Elia, Cedric, and Caleb were strolling through the streets of the capital. The girl had made up her mind, ready to deal with any unexpected situation. A few hours earlier, she had told Olivia that only 3 of them were going to the capital. They intended to act with extreme secrecy, so they only brought a minimum number of people. But the maid was worried it might be too dangerous and begged her to reconsider the plan. However, Elia remained calm, as she had Cedric, who was strong now, and Caleb, who would become strong in the future. Just then, Olivia recalled the other maids gossiping about how she was so accommodating to a commoner. The maids thought Olivia had lost all her dignity and was just wagging her tail for the young lady. Just then, Elia appeared near them, and they were terrified, worried she might have overheard the conversation. The girls simply saw that their hands were full and offered to help, but they began to protest, worried that the lady would hurt her delicate hands. Despite this, Elia decided to show them she wasn't as fragile as she looked, grabbing one of the boxes and hoisting it onto her shoulder without a change in expression. Elia just wanted to know where to take the box. Then she added that her small arms could only carry this one box, and the maids would have to carry the rest. Not wanting to incur the Duke's wrath later, the maids had no choice but to obey. Elia decided to just give them her own boxes as well, while urging them to hurry up. Olivia saw all this from around the corner, and recalling it now, she smiled to herself. She was still most worried about Lady Elia's safety, but Elia told her not to worry. Now, the three of them were strolling down the main road of the capital. They passed all sorts of people and approached a couple, hoping to subtly get some information out of them. Elia said she and her family were here for fun, but felt the atmosphere was a bit tense. So the people told them about the vicious incident that had just occurred. After learning a bit about the situation, Elia also noted that this was probably the first time the ducal brothers had appeared together outside the palace. It wouldn't hurt to look around, but the top priority was to find Daphne, and especially for Elia to figure out if she was the mastermind behind it all. In addition, she had to figure out which details were different from the original story. In the original, the fairy cursed Renoir when he was 16, but after Daphne returned, he was cursed at the age of 6 instead. It was unknown what made the fairy cast the curse 10 years earlier, and this was not mentioned in the original story. Elia racked her brains, trying to figure out how to correct this mistake. Just then, Cedric noticed more and more knights appearing and suggested they head to the residential area. For Elia, this was an excellent opportunity to gather intelligence. But after a while, they still had nothing, and the girl began to feel desperate. They were a bit tired and decided to take a short break before moving on. Elia noticed it was very peaceful there, and everyone looked super relaxed. She spotted 2 boys who looked like brothers. But her biggest worry was lifting Cedric's curse as soon as possible so that he and his brother could live just as peacefully. The Duke noticed his bride was lost in thought again. He remembered her screaming hysterically when she learned of Daphne's kidnapping, and then she began to plead with him to act preemptively. Cedric found her behavior strange, as if she knew something. He hoped that by going to the capital together this time, he could discover something about Elia. He desperately wanted to know what secrets this beautiful and eccentric woman was hiding. Suddenly, a child's shout broke their thoughts. Some children were playing, and a boy's older sister asked him if he was having fun. Elia found the whole scene super heartwarming. She smiled in complete relaxation, but Cedric was tense all over, wanting to question Elia, but feeling nervous. Just as he finally gathered his courage and reached for her hand, the girl suddenly jumped up, saying she was recharged and suggested they move on. Then she called out to Caleb, who was gazing into the distance. The boy was so engrossed that he didn't even hear Elia calling him first. So the girl looked in that direction herself, trying to figure out what had captured his attention. Over at a stall, a man was making lollipops to sell to children. They were lemon honey flavored, and Elia remembered Caleb had a thing for lemons. She guessed the boy might also have a sweet tooth, but was too shy to ask. So she offered to buy Caleb one of those lollipops. The boy's eyes lit up. Just then, Cedric chimed in that street food wasn't safe. Elia shot him a slightly annoyed glance, since that was almost all she ate herself. Cedric noticed his brother's mood instantly drop, so he immediately changed his tune, saying that lollipops were very refreshing and could clear one's head. Yes. He had to say it so profoundly just to make up with his brother and not look like a jerk. Caleb got his lollipop right away, while the vendor had a "my God, this kid is so handsome" look on his face. The young Duke was very polite, thanked him for the candy, and prepared to devour it on the spot. His sweet, childish voice and cute face melted the candy vendor's heart. Then the three of them sat down, and the boy savored his treat. In that moment, Elia felt like they were a real family, happy even without their fancy titles. Then she noticed a couple more children approaching the stall, wanting lollipops. The two looked like a brother and sister. Elia enjoyed watching them and was reminded of her own little brother. But then she saw that the children didn't have enough money, as the older sister only bought a lollipop for her brother and not for herself. She didn't even let him share, telling him to eat the whole thing himself. Cedric once again saw the strange expression on his fiancée's face and asked her what was wrong. But she just told them both to stay there for a moment. She walked up to the counter, bought another lollipop, and handed it to the little girl. Her little brother was happy that his sister could have a treat too, but the girl herself became shy. She felt embarrassed taking something from a stranger. Nevertheless, she accepted the gift and thanked the kind lady for her generosity. After that, they said their goodbyes, and Elia prepared to return to her dukes. Meanwhile, Cedric watched his fiancée with growing surprise. The vendor struck up a friendly conversation with her, assuming she was in town on vacation with her family. He recommended a square with a fountain that had a great view. Cedric couldn't hear what they were saying, only seeing their smiles, and felt a little jealous. Elia explained to the vendor that there were some bad rumors about that square, trying to fish for information. He admitted that the atmosphere in the capital was tense, and all the knights and soldiers were super busy. The vendor himself couldn't believe that Princess Daphne had been kidnapped. However, Elia didn't understand how a commoner would know about the kidnapping. Maybe there was a notice posted or something. The Marinas family was one of the 3 great families supporting the Empire, and since Daphne had saved the prince, the girl's kidnapping was a heavy blow to the family. But only the inner circle knew the truth. Elia decided to ask a few more questions when the little boy approached her. Meanwhile, Cedric started to get anxious that his fiancée hadn't returned and decided to go to her himself. The boy then whispered to her that he had a gift for her. He was touched that she had bought his sister a lollipop, and it meant a lot to her. Elia thanked him and promised to cherish the gift. Then she held out her hand, ready to receive a small item. The gift turned out to be a common beetle. Since Elia had an extreme fear of cockroaches from her past life, her face immediately turned pale with fright. Then, her piercing scream echoed, startling Cedric. She really wanted to throw the bug away, but didn't want to hurt the little boy's feelings, even though it disgusted her. She explained to Cedric that she screamed with excitement, and in her panic, she accidentally slipped and fell backward. Seeing this, Cedric rushed towards her so fast that his hat flew off his head. Everyone immediately noticed the situation, realizing the lady could get hurt. But luckily, before her head could hit the curb, the Duke managed to use his magic. Elia was suspended in midair as anti-gravity magic acted on her. The Duke couldn't have made it in time just by running, so he saved her this way, for which he apologized afterward. But Elia was actually grateful that her head didn't crack open on the pavement. However, she kind of wished the Duke hadn't used magic and had caught her himself, like in those romance novels. Thus, she felt a little disappointed. However, at this moment, the vendor noticed the Duke's use of magic and began to guess who was standing before him. Just then, a man sharply told him to shut up. But that didn't change the fact that these people had recognized the Indigentia family, and Elia was embarrassed that they had so foolishly exposed their identities. The men then introduced themselves. The vendor's name was Alonzo, and the other man was Jordan. It seemed the others hadn't noticed what had just happened, but the Duke and his lady admitted they had snuck out to find answers. Then Elia turned to Alonzo, feeling that he knew something, like how he might know the princess was kidnapped. Now he couldn't bluff his way out of it, as she had clearly heard what he said. So Alonzo admitted that while he was selling candy in another district, a customer had mentioned it. A carriage returning from the Imperial Palace had vanished into thin air right before the person's eyes. Elia found this method of kidnapping rather strange. Furthermore, a figure completely wrapped in a cloak stood motionless at the scene and then disappeared as well. The description of the cloak matched the fairy's attire in the novel. At first, people thought magic was used to move the carriage, as that family was known for its magic. But given the circumstances, kidnapping was a better explanation. The person who told us this was from the Elfiame Square Gate, and because of construction there, he had to take the main road, which is where the magic energy pipeline is located. Because of the construction, no one had been near that place for days. Elia knew there would be fewer witnesses there, but that person had definitely messed up. The main magic pipeline transports magic from the Emperor's castle to the residential areas. The road is lined with magic stones that prevent the uncontrolled use of magic from the castle. If magic is used nearby, the magic stones will capture traces of the user. You need powerful magic to see those traces, and Cedric was the perfect person for the job. Despite this, he wanted to be sure the candy vendor was telling the truth. The man swore he had never seen anything like it, but every word he said was true. So Cedric thanked him for the information and handed him a money pouch. It was filled with gold coins, and Alonzo and his partner were thrilled to have been of help. Afterward, they began to say their goodbyes, as they had a lot to do. But Caleb suddenly froze and started staring at the lollipops again. Alonzo noticed the boy's gaze and realized he wanted more candy. The vendor wanted to give the young Duke one, but his partner started elbowing him, telling him not to give things away for free. Nevertheless, Caleb got his precious lollipop, and he promised with a silly grin that he would definitely eat it. Then the Dukes headed towards the nearby square. On the way, Cedric blurted out, asking if that was what Elia and Alonzo were talking about. When she went over, she admitted that the vendor had also recommended several parks suitable for a family stroll. Hearing this, the Duke relaxed a bit and even gave a sweet smile. It seemed Elia didn't realize he was just jealous and had no idea why he would ask such a question. Meanwhile, Calvados Marinist had dug up some dirt on the Indigentia family, and after gathering some men, he decided to set out immediately to find his daughter. Elsewhere in a gloomy place, Daphne was tied up and blindfolded for good measure. The girl had no idea where she was, and she was completely subdued. She only knew she had been kidnapped, but not why. Despite this, Daphne tried to remain calm, believing her father would surely find and rescue her. The princess knew she was in a cellar, just like before, which she could tell from the stale, cold air. But she also knew this wasn't the palace dungeon, which didn't have this kind of stench. Meanwhile, the robed figure who kidnapped Daphne was trekking through a forest, excited that everything was going according to plan. All that was left was to wait for one person, and things would be set right. Hearing footsteps behind him, the person was glad that the one he was waiting for had arrived, but it was the Duke of Indigentia who came, filling the robed figure with dread. The kidnapper was immediately caught in a gravity magic trap and fell face first to the ground. Cedric told him not to move, lest he break something. Elia was glad they had found the bastard. The Duke then explained to the kidnapper that they had followed his magical trail, the path of his mana supply. That was how he had pinpointed his location. Now everyone could see that the kidnapper was Marcus Babylon. He was furious that the guild he had asked for help had still left a trail. Cedric demanded that he immediately explain where the Marinist princess was. But Reynolds just kept cursing the Duke for ruining all his plans again. In a novel, the Marquis was once called the future great magician, and even as an adult, he lived with the idea that he was superior to everyone else. To prove himself, he belittled others. But then Cedric appeared, a true genius. Even as a child, he noticed that the Marquis's magic left traces, and suggested he work harder so that Reynolds could strengthen his spells. Then Cedric demonstrated his family's unique magic, a magic he had only seen once. The boy didn't realize how complex the magic was, using it as naturally and effortlessly as breathing. He eventually became a super powerful mage, but that was all in the past. After Cedric was cursed, the Marquis began to use him as a complete pawn. Now, Reynolds was furious that the Duke had ruined his entire plan. But what truly enraged him was seeing Elia standing before him with a triumphant look on her face. The Marquis was now convinced that everything had gone wrong from the moment this commoner appeared. He glared at her like a mad dog ready to bite her leg. Elia was a bit shocked that Reynolds was behind this, but they still needed to find Daphne. Cedric repeated his demand, telling the Marquis to say where he had hidden the Marinist princess. Reynolds just hissed through his teeth, confident that his plan would still succeed. He then said they needed to go to the cabin up ahead, where they would find Daphne. The heroes were naturally excited, ready to set off immediately to rescue the kidnapped girl. But the Marquis was actually stalling for time, playing the long game. Later, Daphne heard someone coming, but she just assumed it was her kidnapper. But then she noticed the people were struggling to open the door, so it must be her rescuers. Indeed, Elia did struggle with the lock for a moment, probably because it had some kind of magical seal on it. She was so angry that the lock wouldn't budge that she simply went into beast mode and ripped the lock right off the door. Both Cedric and Caleb were stunned, staring at the seemingly delicate girl. Then she threw the door open, and a gust of fresh air rushed into the musty room. Just then, sunlight fell on the face of the bound Daphne. She heard someone promise to free her, and the voice sounded very familiar. As it turned out, Elia and the two dukes were not the saviors after all. When they burst into the dilapidated cabin, it was empty. But then, Marchioness Jorel appeared for Daphne, telling the princess not to be afraid anymore, as she was here to get her. Later, the furious dukes returned to the Marquis, who was still stuck to the ground, and demanded he explain why he lied, as the hideout was empty. He mumbled that he had hidden her where they couldn't reach her, and that no one would be able to find her. Then he turned to Lady Elia, his voice filled with rage. He said he couldn't stand the sound of her voice anymore, and told her to back off. Now he told the dukes not to trust Elia, saying she was brainwashing them and framing his daughter. The Marquis also decided to frame Elia for the kidnapping of the Marina's princess. Meanwhile, Jorel was also telling Daphne that it was the Duke's fiancée, Lady Elia, who had ordered her kidnapping. She claimed the girl had hired a dark guild to do it, which was why the child had ended up in this godforsaken place. Daphne couldn't believe the future Duchess would do such a thing, but Gerald insisted that. Apparently, as soon as Elia found out that the princess could lift Cedric's curse, she decided to get rid of her. Gerald also complained that the girl had threatened them into taking on this task, but they had refused. She was on the verge of tears, claiming that Elia had accused her of abusing the little Duke, which was why she hadn't immediately noticed the princess's kidnapping, for which she was terribly sorry. For some reason, Duke Marnez and Marquis Babylon had always maintained a rather good relationship, but with no common interests, there were rumors that they were planning some kind of joint operation. This was exactly why Reynold was so confident he would win. Princess Marnez had known Gerald since childhood, so she had no reason to doubt her. Daphne had even taught Gerald the prince's mirror shield magic. The imperial family trusted the Marnez family, and the Marnez family trusted the Babylon family. Moreover, once Duke Marnez heard about this, he would never let it go. Even Cedric and Caleb would be powerless, as it would be an imperial order, and Elia would be finished. But now, the Duke brothers didn't believe a word of the Marquis's claim that Elia was involved in the kidnapping. Instead, they believed the Babylon family had orchestrated the kidnapping just to frame her. Despite this, the girl couldn't shake off the ominous premonition. Caleb took her hand, told her not to worry, and promised that he and his brother would take care of everything. His smile gave Elia the confidence to pull herself together. She was incredibly proud that the boy believed in her honesty and was ready to stand up for her. Still, she was worried sick about what had happened to Daphne. Elia had been so focused on the matter of the fairies that she had completely forgotten about the princess's current state. She prayed that those guys hadn't hurt the girl in order to make her testify against her. But then, Elia remembered Reynolds' frustrated look when he saw them, so he must have been waiting for someone else. In that case, Daphne was likely somewhere in this forest, but she didn't have time to wait for the Marquis to confess. The girl ran off, telling the Dukes she was going to higher ground to get a better look around. She confessed that she suspected the princess was nearby. Cedric grew anxious that his future wife was heading into the woods alone, but she told him not to worry and promised to be right back. Caleb followed her, as he had to ensure her safety, and this also gave Cedric the opportunity he needed to deal with that Babylon bastard. And Babylon just smirked, saying that the person he was waiting for would arrive soon, and then everything would fall into place. Reynold and his daughter were already tasting victory. The Marchioness told Daphne to hurry and leave for a safer place. But what the Babylon family didn't realize was that Princess Marnez had already returned to the past. So, naturally, she didn't believe a word the young Marchioness said. Gerald was stunned, as she was genuinely trying to convince the child that she was on her side, but Marnez just kept saying that she wouldn't believe a single word she said. The Marchioness hadn't expected this, swearing she had no reason to lie, and that the girl had to believe her. Daphne sighed heavily, knowing she couldn't reveal that she had returned to the past, but she admitted that she had once trusted the Marchioness because of her care. But things were different now. She clearly remembered the moment the Marchioness had shown her true colors. Back then, she had harshly confessed that she really disliked a child who couldn't even use magic. Now, Daphne realized this woman was trying to use her to frame an innocent person. She declared that from this moment on, she would not be deceived by her again. Gerald was bewildered that the girl, who had recently been so lacking in confidence, was now ruining her plans. Just as she was wondering how to salvage the situation, the little one tried to slip away. But the Marchioness grabbed her arm, glaring with a fury that could have pinned her to the wall. Then she loudly demanded that she believe her, claiming she wouldn't let her go alone. Her eyes softened and her voice became sweet again as she tried to persuade Daphne to cooperate. She kept saying it was all a misunderstanding and that they were doing this for the princess's own good. Somehow, Daphne was swayed by the Marchioness's voice and followed her, not knowing where they were going. But then, she remembered her father telling her to run when she was imprisoned in her past life. In that instant, she shook off her hand and bolted past the Marchioness, Fortunately, the door was unlocked, and the princess managed to run outside. She found herself in the middle of a forest and started looking for the way back to the capital. Just then, a group of robed figures appeared, supposedly sent by Marquis Babylon to rescue the princess. They also began trying to persuade Daphne to go with them to a safe place. It was then that she remembered the knights inviting her in the exact same way and realized it was a trap. The child took off, running in the other direction, trying to get as far away from those bastards as possible. Just then, the Marchioness burst out of the cabin in disarray, shouting to catch the princess. Gerald was determined to make the girl trust her again, or they would all be finished. And as Daphne ran through the woods again, she knew she had to escape. She couldn't understand why this crap always happened to her. All she wanted was a normal life. It was ironic, wasn't it? Princess Marignes was back at the same damn cliff. For a moment, she panicked. She could hear Gerald and her men closing in behind her. Daphne looked back again to see how close they were. She tripped again and tumbled over the cliff. The Marchioness was horrified. This was more than just a kidnapping now. This would be the murder of a princess. As Daphne fell, she thought about how she had wanted to change her fate, but everything ended up leading to the same conclusion. She prepared for death, hoping she would never have to go through this again. Just then, Elia appeared out of nowhere and grabbed her hand. Daphne saw her pink hair and jewel-like eyes, and she had an idea of who this was. Elia was glad she had caught the little one, even if it meant they would both fall together. But she twisted her body to put the princess on top, hoping the fall wouldn't hurt too much. Just then, Cedric's arms wrapped around her, and he began to scold her for always being so reckless. He was terrified, of course. If he hadn't made it in time, his bride could have been seriously injured. Elia just thanked the Duke for coming to the rescue once again. Cedric couldn't stay mad for long. The most important thing was that the girl was now safe. Then Elia asked where Caleb had run off to. Gerald saw them from above, completely baffled as to how they got there, with pure terror written on her face. Her servants began to whisper amongst themselves, planning to bolt before they got in any deeper. They tried to teleport away quickly, but the transport failed, and they fell flat on their faces. Duke Caleb approached them, the air so heavy you could feel the ground tremble beneath his boots. He was furious, telling them not to even think about running away. Meanwhile, Elia quickly checked on the princess, hoping she wasn't hurt. Daphne herself began to wonder how those two had gotten here, and Elia explained everything they had done to find and rescue the princess. Now, the future Duchess was genuinely relieved that the little one was okay, but it occurred to her that they hadn't even introduced themselves to each other. So she announced that she was Duke Cedric's fiancée. Daphne, still a bit shaken, asked the lady to hold her hand. Afterward, they decided to head to a safe place. Holding Elia's hand, the princess felt an incredible and reassuring warmth coming from her. She had tried to escape on her own before, but now, for the first time, she truly felt safe. Elia noticed the princess was trembling slightly and realized she was still scared. Then she quietly asked Cedric what had happened to the Marchioness, since her daughter and servants were surely up to something. It turned out the Duke was dragging Reynold behind them, magically tied to him like a balloon. Cedric also told her not to worry about Gerald, as she had been taken care of as well. After they had walked a bit further, a surprise awaited the princess. After pushing aside yet another bush, she saw her father, who was also out looking for her. Elia was a bit shocked, not understanding how Duke Calvados could be here, but she was super happy, rushing into her father's arms like a small child, while he was on the verge of tears seeing her safe and sound. He just kept apologizing to his daughter for being so late. Elia figured that Duke Marignes had probably followed the magical trail, just like them. But now everything was fine, and she was even glad she had convinced Cedric to head to the capital. Just then, Calvados noticed her and Cedric. He looked at them with a very stern gaze, and even scolded them for being shameless. Apparently, he thought the two of them had done something to his daughter and was getting ready to take them down. He began to gather his magic, and Cedric told Elia to get behind him, but she started to plead with Duke Marignes to hear them out, but he wouldn't. He was convinced these people were trying to shift the blame. I get that. He was too worried about Daphne to think straight. As a father, he wasn't going to let this slide. Elia started racking her brain for a way to calm the man down, so they could explain everything later. But then Daphne herself intervened, cupping her father's face in her hands. She got his attention and told him to stop his rampage. Both Cedric and Elia were stunned, but they figured this could only be a good thing. Then the girl began to plead with her father not to attack the dukes of Indigencia. Then she confessed that they weren't the ones who had kidnapped her, and that the mastermind was actually Marquis Babylon. Calvados found out the Marquis also planned to frame the Indigencia family for the kidnapping. The child told him everything about how she had escaped, saying she had fallen from a cliff and that these people had saved her. Then she wondered why her father would so blindly trust Babylon when he was the main villain. This also made Elia curious, as there was no information about this in the original novel. But when she saw Cedric barely able to contain his anger, it was clear to her why Calvados didn't trust them. Just then, little Caleb walked into the clearing, bathed in the sunset. Elia was glad the boy had finally shown up and started asking where he had been hiding. But Caleb ignored her and turned to Calvados, saying he knew the reason why he did it. Duke Marnez and his daughter were completely confused, not understanding what the boy was rambling about. And Elia was startled by the sudden change in her little companion's voice. With a furious look on his face, the little Duke demanded that Calvados answer his question. Caleb knew it was a tricky situation, but he couldn't ignore the fact that a member of the Indigencia family was being suspected of being involved in a kidnapping. Coming closer, the boy announced that he was filing a complaint against Duke Marnez regarding this whole incident. However, Calvados finally came to his senses and admitted he had jumped to conclusions. Ever since Cedric got that curse, our family's relationship has become somewhat superficial. Calvados thought they were out for revenge, so he believed the Marquis story. Cedric decided this was the perfect time to hear the Babylon family squirm and make excuses. He snapped his fingers, and Reynolds fell to the ground, spread-eagled. Gerald landed next to him, both of them frozen in fear, but also angry. The Marquis started hissing that he could explain everything, but only if the gravity magic was lifted first. He just wanted to get off the ground and stand up straight again. But Caleb accused him of committing a grave crime against the princess and his own family. We're talking about treason, and the Marquis family would be handed over to the noble court. Just then, the Knights of the Golden Lion appeared out of nowhere, demanding that Calvados explain what was happening. Elia hoped this would be the end of it, but her thoughts were interrupted by Gerald, who started crying and begging for mercy. If Elia didn't know what this woman had done before, she might have actually felt sorry for her. But she had no pity for these scumbags and silently turned away. Then Daphne approached her, realizing she hadn't yet thanked Elia for saving her. She also asked if the future Duchess was hurt, but Elia assured her she was fine. Then, in a quieter voice, Daphne confessed that she wanted to ask the girl for a favor. Elia became curious and happily agreed. It turned out the princess wanted to call her savior's sister and was now asking for permission. This was quite unexpected for Elia, but she agreed as she liked the idea too. Afterward, they planned to return to the duchy using Cedric's magic. Daphne was a little sad, realizing she wanted to spend more time with this girl. She would never forget how she had jumped after her. Not everyone would do that for a stranger. And besides, Elia kept smiling sweetly at her, happy that she was safe. The girl wanted to get closer to this lady, but she couldn't get any closer than the Indigencia family. Just then, Cedric came over and called for Elia. He also turned to Princess Marnez, clearly happy that she was now okay. He even knelt before her on one knee, showing the girl great respect. It was then that Daphne gathered her courage to say something to Lord Cedric, but she whispered it in his ear so no one could hear. And Elia was dying of curiosity, wondering what it was. Cedric was very surprised afterward, and Daphne added that it would be very useful information for him. After they said their goodbyes, Elia tried to get it out of the Duke what the little princess had told him. But Cedric was tight-lipped, which started to annoy her. Then he stopped, looked her in the eyes, and told her never to act alone again. She knew herself that acting alone would violate their contract. What she didn't understand was that Cedric just didn't want her to be in danger. She cleverly changed the subject, suggesting they wait for Caleb, who had disappeared somewhere. The boy was just looking at the princess, complaining that he didn't like any of this. It was late when they returned to the duchy, and Elia went out onto the balcony. She was thinking about how much had happened today, still not understanding why so many characters were suddenly getting mixed up in her life. But on the bright side, she was glad that Daphne was now okay, and she no longer had to worry about her. Then Elia started to feel very sleepy and was about to go to bed when Cedric suddenly decided to pay her a visit. He apologized for showing up unannounced so late, but he needed to talk to her. Unsure what could be so important at this hour, Elia assured him he wasn't bothering her. The Duke asked how she was feeling, which was a bit strange since she was fine, just a little tired. But she liked the concern Cedric was showing. So she smiled sweetly and thanked him for worrying about her. Then she admitted she couldn't sleep and had been mesmerized by the moon, inviting him in. They went out onto the balcony together, just relaxing and gazing at the night sky. Occasionally watching shooting stars, Cedric also glanced at Elia from time to time, admitting that the moonlight was truly beautiful. This made her happy because ever since she came to this place, she had often gazed at the night sky and could never get enough of its beauty. It was then that Cedric dropped a bombshell, saying that given the current situation, they needed to get married as soon as possible. The Duke explained to his future bride that the Babylon family would soon be gone from the duchy, and the Marquis was influential, which meant his followers would be gone too. So the duchy's population would take a big hit. Elia was a little curious about what would happen to Marquis Babylon. I mean, it was obvious he couldn't escape the death penalty for the crap he pulled. It creeped her out a bit, but she hoped it wouldn't affect her. Then, as she was fixing her hair, Cedric saw a scratch on her arm and started asking when she got it. It was probably from the woods, but the Duke still looked worried sick. She assured him it was just a small scratch, and that she was perfectly fine. Then, without any warning, Cedric apologized to her. It bothered him that dangerous things kept happening since she arrived, and that he hadn't been able to protect her better. His expression was so serious in that moment that Elia just wanted to see him smile. Then she touched the corners of his mouth with her fingers and pulled his skin into a smile. This made her laugh, but she told Cedric that he looked much better when he smiled. She also made sure he knew he didn't need to apologize, as all of this was the result of her own choices. Besides, she was the one who had originally suggested they should go save Daphne, and Cedric had just agreed with her decision. Seeing his confusion, Elia promised him that from now on, only good things would happen to them. The guy was relieved and thanked his fiancée for those kind words, because as he thought, no matter what others said about her, she was a good person. Since it was late and getting chilly, Elia suggested they go back inside. Cedric also noticed they had been talking for a long time and praised her again for her performance today. When he called her a good person again, she suddenly got a lump in her throat. She had never forgotten that she was the source of his curse, and she could only apologize to him in her heart. She wished she could confess that she wasn't the person he thought she was. Elia realized she had strayed a bit from her main goal, to free Cedric from his curse. Meanwhile, in another place, it looked very spooky due to the night. A certain blue-haired lady had just received a report about the future Duchess, Elia. The maid who brought the news was clearly afraid of incurring her mistress's wrath, but she let her go and began to think about the bride of the Duke of Indigencia. It was the Empress, and for some reason, she really disliked the name she had heard today. A few days later, the verdict for the kidnapping of Miss Marignez was delivered. The entire family was executed, and the Marquis's head was put on public display. Elia was just glad they had returned to the duchy so quickly and didn't have to witness such a gruesome sight. Now that Marquis Babylon's influence was gone, she and Cedric could finally relax and prepare for their wedding. Since then, a lot had changed in the duchy as well. Elia even made some new friends, high society ladies who took a great liking to her. They wanted to help her plan the wedding, but first, they wanted to gossip over tea. But the future Duchess had other things to do, so they agreed to meet another day. It was mainly Olivia who was helping Elia, and they had actually become good friends. Even the vassals who had been completely against the marriage before had now changed their tune. They were now acting as if they couldn't wait for the big day to finally arrive. And all those scrutinizing gazes that had once been directed at Caleb were gone. It seemed the reason they had been so harsh before was that they had taken Reynolds' money. This sudden change in attitude angered her, but she was still relieved that everything was resolved. The wedding preparations were finally complete, and they could relax and enjoy their days. Elia couldn't forget Cedric's words about her being a good person. She was bored out of her mind, so she decided to do something for Cedric. A short while later, she appeared before the brothers with a tray. She had made some snacks and suggested they have tea together. Cedric appreciated her thoughtfulness, but he didn't want her to overwork herself. Elia, as always, said it was no big deal, especially since she wanted to make something delicious. Caleb, not one to refuse a treat from his favorite girl, grabbed a cookie and tried it. The girl loved watching the boy gobble it up, and she was also happy that Cedric enjoyed it too. The Duke was a bit surprised and wondered how she knew how he felt. She explained to him that it was written all over his face. because whenever he tried something she made, his expression would immediately become content and peaceful. Cedric was still a little surprised, though. I mean, Elia had only known him for a short time, but she had already noticed things about him that he didn't even know himself. This girl was becoming more and more of a mystery to him, and he was eager to figure her out. After they sat down at the tea table, Elia was informed that the lady from the salon had arrived. She had planned to go for a wedding dress fitting, but the dress was delivered earlier than she expected. Caleb wanted to go with Elia, but she reminded him that he had an administrative class next. The boy was a little disappointed, but he wasn't going to argue. It wasn't that he didn't want to go to class. It was just that time always flew by when he was with Elia. She asked him to hang out after class, and Caleb's mood immediately brightened. She loved how this man could still act like a complete child at times. Elia went with Cedric to choose the wedding dress. She was starting to truly feel that her wedding day with the Duke of Ahar was drawing closer. It felt unreal to be marrying such a handsome man. Moreover, the wedding was on a grand scale, like a royal ball. Cedric suddenly asked Elia how she was feeling. He wanted to know if she was unhappy. The question struck her as a bit odd, but then she remembered that she had said something similar during the last dress fitting. But this was normal. Some brides feel overwhelmed before their wedding. The lady of the salon had told Cedric about this, so he thought his bride might be feeling the same way. After all, usual weddings were either held in some shabby hall, or girls had to marry someone they hated, and they might not even like how they looked, so some brides would become anxious. Elia realized that Cedric genuinely cared about whether she was happy. That was probably why he was trying to gently ask what was bothering her. The Duke looked directly into Elia's eyes and asked her again how she was feeling now. She exclaimed excitedly that everything was perfect, hoping to end the interrogation. She was indeed happy, but the Duke wanted to make sure nothing was troubling her. She suddenly blurted out that he was super handsome. She knew she had said it without thinking, but it was the truth, even if she felt extremely embarrassed now. But Cedric just took it in stride, even thanking his bride for being so honest. However, he wasn't done with his questions. There was something else he wanted to know. To avoid saying anything else without thinking, Elia told him to go talk to the lady himself, as she had to go see Olivia. Before Cedric could say another word, she dashed out. Now, looking at his lovely face, she felt a bit strange and could feel herself starting to blush furiously. Left alone, the Duke recalled what Miss Marinus had said to him in the forest. According to her, Elia really liked men with bright smiles. This was a rather unexpected confession for Cedric, but now he understood what Daphne was implying. Recalling Elia saying herself that his smile suited him, he realized he was always too serious. This started to bother him greatly, and those words kept echoing in his mind. He also realized that his fiancée found his smile very charming. Just as he was lost in thought, his assistant Edwin found him with some documents. He had noticed the Duke acting strangely lately and wondered what was troubling him so much. But no matter what Cedric was doing, his fiancée's every word resounded in his ears. Then he went to Madame Angela's shop, and she was surprised to see him alone. The Duke explained that Miss Elia would arrive later, and the salon owner agreed to wait for her. But she also noticed that the young master had something on his mind and asserted that his fiancée could never be unhappy because he was drop-dead gorgeous. The lady had overheard their conversation because the door was open. Angela was more than capable of handling the Ahar family's wedding attire. Even though she was just a commoner, it was hard to find a noble who didn't buy from her. Moreover, she was happy to work for the Duke because she wanted to know more about Elia. I mean, she was just an ordinary girl, but this handsome man had noticed her, and she liked that. Later, the fitting went very smoothly, and Elia could finally relax, while Olivia was constantly gushing about how beautiful she would be at the wedding and how good her taste was. But Cedric wasn't done with his fitting, and she couldn't wait to see him in his suit. They tried on their outfits separately because the groom isn't supposed to see the bride in her wedding dress before the ceremony. She, however, was allowed to see the groom. But for now, she asked Olivia to remind her what else was on the schedule. It turned out that after the fitting, she and Cedric needed to check the honeymoon suite. Hearing this, Elia almost choked on her tea. She had completely forgotten that marriage was more than just a friendly companionship, and the thought of them going to that room together made her extremely flustered. Their marriage was indeed contractual, but they still had to act like a real couple in front of everyone. And from now on, they would be living in the same room. Just then, Cedric walked in with his shirt unbuttoned, and Elia panicked even more. He had just heard his bride's cough and rushed over to check if she was okay, so he hadn't had time to button up. Olivia explained that she had just choked, and Cedric breathed a small sigh of relief. Then they told him to go back to the fitting room. Since Elia was fine, Olivia said, "Hey, hurry up and finish the fitting. We have to go see the honeymoon suite." Hearing this, the Duke froze a little. He had completely forgotten about it too. And Elia was once again mortified, even covering her face for a moment. The room fell silent. Even the maids shut their mouths. Just then, Madame Angela walked over with a smile, as she knew why they were so embarrassed. Then she looked Elia over and thought, "My goodness, this is completely different from what I heard. These two really looked like a lovely couple about to get married." After a while, they finally completed the entire wedding dress fitting process. Angela watched with great interest the whole time as Cedric and Elia did these things together. For a moment, she gave the bride a somewhat mysterious look. She confessed that she was very excited because she had heard Cedric was marrying a girl he genuinely liked. Then the lady asked if she could ask them something. She desperately wanted to know what made Miss Elia fall in love with Mr. Cedric. The question caught the girl off guard, and she was at a loss for words, thinking, "What should I say?" She stammered a bit as she began to explain that he was very kind and, very good looking. Then they posed the same question too. Mr. Cedric. He liked that Elia always put others first and truly try to understand them. And she wouldn't hesitate to lend a helping hand to people, which Cedric thought was the best quality. Seeing Elia act that way made him slowly fall in love with her. This made Madame Angela very happy. Elia started to sweat, feeling that her fiancé was exaggerating a bit, which made her uncomfortable. She kept stealing glances at his face, and at that moment, his expression was so sweet and carefree. Elia noticed again that the Duke had changed a lot recently. After saying goodbye to the lady, they set off to check the honeymoon suite. Afterwards, his assistant came over and asked him how everything was going. Cedric didn't want to report to him and just said coolly that everything was fine. But Edwin was very excited, which meant his hard work had paid off. He had now come to report to Cedric on a task he had given him earlier. The Duke had almost forgotten about it, and Edwin reminded him it was about investigating Elia's case. Then, he lowered his head guiltily and reported that he hadn't been able to find any information. Not this time either. They had questioned everyone in the villages around Miss Elia's cottage. This made the Duke a little frustrated, but he wasn't particularly dejected. Edwin interjected that she was no ordinary person, or they would have dug up her background long ago. Cedric cut him off, telling his assistant not to get carried away with what he was saying. The man apologized for overstepping and for what he said, but Cedric didn't scold him, just told him to continue the investigation. He needed to know something about her. This woman was driving him crazy, looking so simple, yet seeming to hide some huge secret. Meanwhile, Elia was bored to death. She was just wandering around with nothing to do. Everyone else was busy, so she was killing time wandering the halls. As she passed a room, she heard Caleb's voice, and he was talking entirely about her. The door was ajar, and curiosity drove her to peek inside to hear what the boy was saying. It turned out he was alone in the room. His expression was very serious, and he was holding that notebook he always carried with him. The little Duke wrote something in that thing every day. Just then, Caleb said there was something he couldn't believe, and he was going to investigate himself. Elia was terrified, realizing the boy was investigating her. She was terrified that the little Duke would find out she was actually a fairy, and especially since he planned to keep digging into her. She was afraid of what he might discover. Then Caleb walked out of the room, and Elia hid behind the door so he wouldn't see her. After he was far enough away, she decided to take his notebook from the desk to see what was written inside. She didn't want to snoop in someone's diary, but the situation was too dire, and she had no choice. Before flipping through the pages, she closed her eyes for a second, praying she was wrong about all this. The first thing she read was that Caleb had managed to get her to stop dieting, but he was worried she would start again as the wedding approached. The boy didn't want her to lose weight and planned to make sure she kept eating dessert. Elia had actually decided to watch her weight, but realized Cedric and Caleb wouldn't let that happen. Flipping through the other pages, she was convinced the boy wasn't suspicious at all. This made him even more adorable in her eyes, and she decided to give him a big hug when she saw him. Then she read about the time they cooked together and when the three of them went stargazing, which brought back many memories. Elia found from the entries that the boy had been very happy lately. He was glad his brother seemed healthier and the whole duchy seemed more vibrant. But Caleb was frustrated because once Elia helped his brother break the curse, their marriage would end. This meant they would have to part ways, and the boy really didn't want her to leave the duchy. Elia knew this too, but she hoped everything would work out for the best. The rest of the time flew by, and before she knew it, the wedding day had arrived. Daphne Marinus was naturally invited to the ceremony, and she looked happier than anyone. Even from a distance, she could tell the duchy looked absolutely gorgeous now. She couldn't wait to see what the ceremony hall looked like, as she knew they had decorated it fit for royalty. And her father, Calvados, was a bit embarrassed that things hadn't gone according to plan. After the Marquis of Babylon was sent to court, the Ahar family made sure everyone knew about it. As a result, all sorts of forgotten dirty laundry started to resurface. The fact that Daphne Marinus was the one who started Cedric's curse was prime gossip material. But since the whole thing was directly related to the royal family, no one dared to say much. People couldn't believe that after everything that had happened, Cedric was still helping Calvados. I mean, he never even got any compensation for what happened back then. Now, rumors about the two families were spreading like wildfire. Gossip mongers were devouring the local newspapers, trying to get the latest scoop. The demand for papers surged so much that they opened a branch in the capital, and they even received a settlement. Half of that money went directly to the wedding venue, and Calvados felt terrible. He was terrified to show up at the wedding because he knew he had no face to see them. But Daphne had received an invitation and wanted to go, so the Duke brought her. The problem was the girl wasn't all smiles. Daphne started to recall that night in the forest when Caleb bluntly called her shameless. She didn't quite understand why he attacked her like that. She reminded him that he wasn't allowed to talk to her that way, and then told him to explain himself. The boy just glared at her, furious. Then, in a harsh voice filled with undisguised hatred, he said it was her fault his brother was cursed. He knew Daphne and her father were happy the prince was safe now, but Caleb was still pained that his brother could have died because of it. Then, the boy's tone softened slightly, admitting that with Elia's arrival, Cedric had a chance to enter the Temple of Knowledge. He was going to marry her, and then find a way to break the curse. This made Caleb happy, but what angered him was that Daphne was still trying to get close to Elia after everything that had happened. The girl explained that Elia had decided to save her on her own, but Caleb insisted she had no choice, even accusing the princess of being at fault for falling off the cliff in the first place. And since Daphne had cursed the man Elia loved, she probably wouldn't have saved the girl willingly. These memories weighed heavily on the princess's mind, and even her father noticed. The boy had warned her that she was only invited to prevent bad rumors from spreading. Caleb even told her not to get her hopes up, but she didn't want to believe him. The girl wanted to apologize to all of them for what happened, but everyone had dispersed too quickly. Now she had her chance, as Daphne didn't want Elia to hate her. Meanwhile, Elia was about to break down because the pearl dress felt super heavy. Olivia was at a loss. What else could she do? She had already removed almost all the pearls, but the lady was still so stressed that she worried she wouldn't even be able to get through the wedding. Seeing the maid's terrified face, though, she explained she had just blurted it out in a moment of panic. Just then, the assistant Edwin appeared, proudly announcing that he knew Miss Elia was having a hard time, so he had requested the little Duke's help. Only then did she notice Caleb standing next to the assistant. Edwin then suggested using gravity magic to make the wedding dress feel lighter. Olivia and Angela both loved the idea. Elia tried to object, still panicking, but Caleb was already getting ready to cast a spell. Despite the turmoil inside, they hoped the wedding would go off without a hitch. Cedric, in his finest suit, was already in the hall waiting for the ceremony to begin, and Elia had agreed to use her gravity magic. Once everything was set, she was thrilled that nothing was weighing her down, feeling completely weightless. Although it seemed a bit strange to use magic at a wedding, she was really enjoying it now. She thanked Caleb for his help, and he was just happy to be able to do something for Elia. Now she could finally marry Cedric without any worries. Just then, the boy suddenly turned serious and turned to Elia. He took her hand and said that if his brother made her suffer in any way in the future, he would teach him a lesson. She knew Caleb was just looking out for her and thanked him for being so frank. Afterwards, he got excited about the three of them living in the ducal castle forever. Elia felt a little uneasy about the word forever, but figured he was just saying it. She thought it might be because everyone was staring at them. so she decided to play along, giving him a sweet smile and declaring that they would indeed live happily ever after. With that settled, it was time for the actual ceremony. Duke Cedric stood in the hall waiting for his bride and noticed all the invited guests were staring at him. It even made him a little uncomfortable how everyone started to gawk at him. It was just that the ladies were now convinced he was really that handsome and couldn't take their eyes off him. The noble women couldn't believe he was actually getting married, but it was in the papers, so it must be true. Other ladies were afraid to get close because of the curse, but this commoner wasn't. Soon, the assistant Edwin announced Elia's arrival. The bride, a girl in a gorgeous dress, was escorted by a super proud-looking little Caleb. Cedric was stunned into silence upon seeing his bride. She was unbelievably beautiful. The guests also gasped but remained quiet, silently admiring the lady in her wedding dress. The Duke noticed that she really looked like a fairy now. As she approached him, he felt a bit strange, almost like he was nervous. But Caleb's happy expression let him know everything should be perfect. Then Cedric pulled his bride closer and gazed lovingly into her eyes. She announced that they were finally getting married and laughed happily. But then she saw the strange look on the groom's face and started to worry, not understanding what could possibly be bothering him. The Duke realized he had zoned out, but immediately snapped back and smiled at her. Cedric thanked Elia for her help, but she had something else on her mind. Once this wedding was over, she could enter the Temple of Knowledge and retrieve her lost memories. That way she could break Cedric's curse, and he and his brother could finally live happily. Then they turned to the altar where the priest was waiting for them. The girl was happy for the time she had spent in the duchy. She was relieved that she had been able to come here without her identity being exposed. Now she hoped to correct the mistakes she had made in the past with her own hands. Just as she was thinking this, Cedric felt that Elia looked like she had something on her mind. But then Edwin's voice boomed, announcing that the bride and groom were taking the first steps into their new life. During the ceremony, Cedric and Elia decided to skip some formalities to speed things up. Later, Cedric asked her if she was okay, admitting he noticed she seemed preoccupied. Elia explained she was just exhausted from the long welcome speech. This put the Duke at ease. Then she suggested they hurry up and break the curse, after which they could go eat something delicious, an idea Cedric fully endorsed. Just as they were about to proceed to the next step, they suddenly noticed a lurking figure, his face hidden in the shadows. Elia didn't recognize him and thought he was just a late guest, but the Duke knew the man. Caleb also became suspicious upon seeing another person appear. This uninvited guest who crashed their wedding turned out to be a servant of Her Majesty the Empress. Elia found this strange, as the palace had said they would not be attending the wedding. Looking at the man, the girl had a very bad feeling. The servant conveyed the Empress's congratulations on the union of Duke Cedric and Miss Elia. She also apologized for not being able to attend the wedding ceremony in person. Furthermore, she reported that they had found traces of an intruder in the Temple of Knowledge, but this person's identity could not be confirmed by the royal family. Therefore, in order to find him, the palace had decided to temporarily close the Temple of Knowledge. The guests who heard all this were shocked, not understanding why they were only being told now. It was as if they had deliberately intended to deliver this news. Elia thought so too. I mean, everyone knew how important this marriage was for Cedric to find a way to break the curse. And the decision to close the temple meant the Empress was keeping a close eye on his curse. She was probably angry that the curse might be broken, which meant she hated the Ihar family. When the curse first happened, the royal family had ignored Cedric's protests, so they held him in contempt. Then the Empress's servant announced they could continue with the ceremony, but the mood had already been ruined. Elia decided she wouldn't let this go. She tried to catch up with the servant to ask questions, but she tripped and Cedric barely caught her. And the guests just thought she was so emotional on such an important day that she could barely walk straight. In reality, Elia was just in too much of a hurry, but the man was gone anyway. Later, Cedric learned from his assistant that the Empress's servant had returned to the palace. Edwin himself was furious and wanted to grab that bastard and teach him a lesson. The Duke told his assistant to calm down, though he himself wouldn't have minded a word with the guy. Just then, Edwin told Cedric to pay more attention to Miss Elia. The Duke thought about it and agreed his assistant was right. She had been through hell. When Edwin was alone, he felt that the young master had become suspicious. Meanwhile, On the way back, Cedric remembered that Elia had acted like everything was fine after hearing the news, but she couldn't hide the look on her face at that damn moment. The Duke himself knew that no one would be okay after going through something like that. He could tell his wife was anxious and wanted to do something to reassure her, but at the same time, he was afraid that after all this, Elia would want to flee the duchy. So when he walked towards the room she was in, the sight before him was somewhat surprising. The girl was sitting at a table piled high with food, stuffing things into her mouth. Caleb and Daphne sat nearby, like her support group, constantly feeding her sweets. Then, Cedric saw Olivia and the head chef fussing around the young mistress like crazy. The Duke stood there, confused, not quite understanding what was happening. When Elia saw Cedric walk in, she was very happy and wanted to chat with him for a bit. On the surface, her mood was completely normal, as if she hadn't just heard some terrible news. She convinced the Duke to go for a walk with her in the garden so they could talk properly in the sunlight and fresh air. Both of them felt a sense of relief. Elia first praised the servants who took care of her, despite them being a bit clumsy. She also understood Cedric's worries and told him not to be so nervous. But he couldn't help but worry, hoping the girl would never leave them. It was then that he suddenly realized he was being incredibly selfish. Suddenly, Elia stopped in her tracks as if she had remembered something and asked her husband to wait. Before he could react, she had already woven a flower crown and placed it on Cedric's head. The Duke was a bit embarrassed, but Elia laughed brightly like a child, saying it really suited him. She explained that his face was as gloomy as a dark cloud, and she just wanted to lighten the mood. They both knew that as they were getting closer to breaking the curse, someone was trying to frame them, but Elia was still taking care of Cedric. Regardless, she was taking care of him, and he realized he wasn't even thinking about going to the temple right away to find a way to lift the curse. The Duke's mind was consumed with the moment this girl would leave their home and no longer be by his side. He knew this relationship was destined to end, but the thought still made his heart ache. Elia interrupted his thoughts, asking if he knew about laurel wreaths. She had heard that in a faraway land, people give laurel wreaths to marathon winners. It meant the winner had gone through a hellish ordeal to reach the finish line, and she said Cedric himself was basically running a marathon. She believed he would reach the finish line safely, break the curse, and receive his laurel wreath. The Duke once again felt that familiar sense of embarrassment. He had come to comfort Elia, but ended up being comforted by her once again. He sincerely thanked her for her concern, admitting that he should have been the one comforting her right now. He knew the wedding was a big deal, and she was probably nervous. As usual, Elia insisted she was having fun because she probably wouldn't have another wedding like this in her life. She also added that she didn't plan on finding another man in the future. She realized that after Cedric, she couldn't fall for anyone else. Her words were comforting, but deep down, the Duke was a nervous wreck. Elia wondered who had broken into the Hall of Knowledge, but Cedric suspected the culprit would never be found because he might not even exist. Or they would just say he died on the spot and his body was cremated, so his identity couldn't be confirmed. The Hall of Knowledge is a place where all events are recorded, and it's actually a dragon's lair, so no one dared to go in. It was said that the Emperor once managed to befriend it, but in the original novel, it was Daphne who befriended the dragon, and Elia wanted to form a connection with it too. At the same time, she understood that the imperial family couldn't stop them forever. Cedric agreed, but explained that it was a sort of warning. The purpose was to make everyone stay away from the Indigentia family. Elia looked at her husband with sympathy. She didn't want him to give up halfway. It angered her that those bastards wouldn't give up and wouldn't leave the Duke alone. She even started fantasizing about wearing the Empress's portrait on her head like a hat. But then she tried to calm herself down as they needed to think about how to solve this new problem. She knew the path they had chosen to the Temple of Knowledge was not the only one. There was a teleportation device in Duchess Daphne's attic, which she used in the original story to go to the temple. She wasn't discovered and even managed to befriend a dragon. But only Daphne knew that secret, and if Elia said she knew the truth, Daphne would become suspicious, especially if news of the secret passage to the temple got out. The Mariniest family could be in danger. Elia was going crazy from not being able to regain her memories, which would make things much easier. Later, while walking with the Duke, she remembered the Oath of Allegiance ceremony for tomorrow. Elia wondered how to prepare, but but Cedric suggested they just go back to the castle and rest. Elia especially needed to rest, as she would soon have to face the public again. She suddenly realized she had no idea how a duchess should act in front of guests. Cedric told her not to worry, because they had the power to influence public opinion anyway. They could do it through the newspapers. Cedric didn't want sympathy, but he felt they needed to take advantage of the situation. Elia thought back on all the crap they had been through and didn't understand why misfortune always clung to this family. Then she suggested they show everyone how devastated they were about not being able to go to the temple. To achieve this effect, they should cancel their honeymoon trip. Cedric agreed with the idea, but he didn't want to cancel the honeymoon. They had been looking forward to it for a long time. They were supposed to go to a legendary resort, a hotspot everyone was talking about. Besides, it would also show everyone that Cedric and Elia married for love. But she thought it was inappropriate to go on a trip after something like this had happened. She felt it was best to show everyone how heartbroken they were. Elia knew it was a bit of a downer, but it would be better for the indigent family. The Duke didn't answer her suggestion right away. It seemed to her that missing the honeymoon trip really bothered him. Elia thought her decision was the right one, and now Cedric's mood made her feel awkward. But he assured her everything was fine, and that he also thought they should proceed with their plan. She was glad he agreed, but didn't believe he was looking forward to the honeymoon. Just as she was thinking, Cedric asked her to promise him one thing, since they couldn't go on their post-wedding trip now. Cedric wanted her to go on a vacation with him after they had been to the Temple of Knowledge. Basically, to postpone their honeymoon trip. Elia was confused by this request. She didn't quite understand why they would do that, especially since she believed that after visiting the temple, they would be able to lift the Duke's curse. If the curse was lifted, they would separate as planned, so the trip would be pointless. To convince Elia to agree, Cedric explained, it would be easier to manipulate public opinion later on, which did sound quite reasonable. Cedric confessed that he was an orphan adopted by a noble family. While he was taking heir classes, he gave up his right as the legitimate heir. After that, he was cursed, and despite receiving no compensation, he accepted his situation. Cedric worked desperately so that his younger brother could become a great duke. Now he had finally found his love and married her, and thanks to her, he could be free of the curse. So, if he could enjoy a honeymoon trip with his beloved after lifting the curse together, he could restore his reputation. Elia remembered that accidents always happen around the Duke, and she thought that if a small honeymoon trip could help Cedric and Caleb, it wouldn't be so bad. Then, with a satisfied smile, she agreed to postpone the trip. This made Cedric very happy. He even felt a sense of relief. So, although Elia was nervous, the wedding actually went very smoothly. Many guests left early, but the rest stayed for the evening banquet. Everyone was feasting and congratulating the happy couple. Later, Caleb approached Elia and asked if she was exhausted after the long day. She thanked him for his concern and said she had actually managed to relax a bit. But the boy wasn't ready to leave her in peace, as he had something else to say. He was a bit fidgety, not knowing how to start, and Elia began to worry about the little Duke. Then he suddenly said he was going to bed and would tell her what it was later. Elia wanted to stop him, but she was surrounded by a group of noble ladies who started congratulating her again. The ladies were admiring her stunning dress, but Elia's gaze remained fixed on Caleb, who disappeared in the blink of an eye. So she thought she must talk to him later. By late night, the girl felt like a walking corpse. She was so tired. She had spoken more in one evening than she had in her entire previous life. But what bothered her most was what Caleb wanted to tell her. Elia found a moment to look for him, but the maids told her the boy was already asleep. Now she was so dejected that even Olivia started to worry. Then she reminded Elia that tonight was their wedding night, and for the first time, asked her mistress to pull herself together despite being tired. Last time, the thought of being in the same room with Cedric nearly suffocated Elia. Now, she couldn't even think straight and felt like she would pass out the moment she hit the bed. But even if she had the energy, Elia was sure she would just feel awkward and nothing would happen anyway. Just then, Olivia told her not to worry about anything, that she would take care of everything. Elia wondered what Cedric was thinking. He had also been through a lot today and was probably already asleep. Actually, the Duke was in his room, a nervous wreck. He knew nothing would happen, that they were just sharing a room, but it still flustered him. It was an ordeal for him, but you had to understand his situation. To calm himself down a bit, Cedric decided to have another glass of cold water, hoping it would help. Meanwhile, Caleb was fast asleep, lost in his dreams. Under his bed, something evil was beginning to take shape, and the child was completely unaware of it. It was a peaceful night, and the light of the full moon bathed the duchy. Just when Cedric thought he could finally relax, Elia's voice broke the silence. She apologized for being late, but the Duke assured her it was fine. He noticed they were wearing matching robes, and Elia explained that Olivia had prepared them. But they both looked exhausted and decided it was best to get to sleep quickly. Cedric offered the bed to Elia, preparing to sleep on the sofa himself, but she felt he would be uncomfortable there, and that he should also lie on the soft bed, especially since the bed was wide enough for both of them to lie down without disturbing each other. Elia lay down first, and her body immediately melted into a state of relaxation. Before falling asleep, she thought about how their prepared fate had become a mess, and the trip to the temple was now postponed. Tomorrow, the girl's life would continue in this palace, and she asked Cedric to take good care of her. Watching his tired wife's eyelids close, he promised he would take care of everything. As they expected, Elia passed out in no time. But the Duke wasn't sleepy at all. Still, it felt good to have his beloved woman sleeping beside him. He carefully brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, so it wouldn't cover her eyes. Elia looked as if she was carrying a very heavy burden. After a while, Elia heard a wail that sounded like an ambulance siren. Wasn't she just with Cedric? How did she end up back in her original body, surrounded by doctors? Her younger brother, Uni, was very sick. After an examination, the doctors concluded he had albinism, but the girl declared he looked just like her. The child's hair and eye color had changed due to a seizure. But then she heard someone call her Elia again, and opening her eyes, she realized it was just a dream. Standing before her was the Duke, looking extremely nervous and worried that something had happened to her. After sitting up, the girl didn't even recognize where she was at first, and then she felt dizzy and might have passed out again if Cedric hadn't held her. Just then, a maid knocked on their door, calling for them in a panicked voice, explaining that something had happened to the young master. The couple rushed to the child's room, with Elia running especially fast. It felt as if she were still in her dream, rushing to help her brother. When she burst into the room, the maids were all gathered around the boy's bed, and someone was shouting for warm water. Elia was terrified, not knowing what had happened to Caleb. They had already sent for a doctor, but he hadn't arrived yet, and the maids were at a loss. The child was lying in bed, looking as if he were still asleep, but he was writhing as if having a seizure, and groaning in pain. Elia was still out of it, thinking it was Uni before her and blaming herself for leaving him for a moment. But then Cedric held her, telling her to calm down and promising he would stay with Caleb. But she didn't seem to hear him at all, feeling like he was a stranger. She felt isolated and helpless, with no mom or dad around. Cedric kept stroking her face, trying to bring her to her senses, and his concern began to work. Elia fully returned to reality and recognized her husband. Then she thanked him for bringing her back. Although she still felt a bit dizzy, she decided to go to Caleb, who wasn't even listening to the maids. The girl hugged the boy, and he began to calm down a little in her arms. Elia held him tightly, whispering that everything would be all right and pleading with him to calm down. She remembered how she used to soothe Uni during his seizures and started doing the same for Caleb. The girl gently rocked him in her arms as if lulling him to sleep and kept whispering that everything would be okay. In a moment, the boy opened his eyes and realized it was Elia before him, and she was immediately happy that his seizure was over and he would be fine now. The maids watched the scene, mesmerized. Cedric didn't dare to make a sound, but he was happy that his brother was better. However, he started to worry about Elia repeating Uni's name from time to time. He remembered her confession that whenever she looked at Caleb, her memories would slowly return. She said he looked a lot like someone very important to her. Cedric guessed that the person Elia was talking about was named Uni. While they were all focused on Caleb's problem, no one noticed a creepy thing hanging from the ceiling. The evil thing was hiding behind the chandelier, and only a close look would reveal its sinister smile. Later, Cedric returned to their room, where he would be alone that night. Elia wanted to stay with Caleb to make him feel comfortable. She didn't want the Duke to see her brother's seizure, explaining that she was used to handling them. Cedric realized that for Elia, Caleb and Uni had become one, and she was taking care of someone named Uni. He hoped her memories were returning, but it seemed more like an unconscious act. Besides, if Elia did remember, she would go looking for Uni, and the Duke probably thought he was gone forever. So Elia was pouring her love onto Caleb because they were almost identical. Just then, Cedric noticed he could no longer feel anything he touched. He realized the curse was getting stronger. Elia stayed with Caleb until the morning, until the sunlight filled the room. The child didn't have another seizure last night, which was a huge relief for her. But then she remembered sending Cedric to another room and started to worry that he might be freaking out. She definitely hadn't expected to see her brother's shadow in Caleb again. The tragedy of her past life had caught her family off guard. Her parents had died, the insurance money was stolen, and she was left with only 10 million won. She rented one of their rooms and lived with Uni, hoping the coach would help. She believed the only way to support her brother was to become a medal winner. Fortunately, she had been called a prodigy since she was a child, but to win, she had to leave 2-year-old Uni with the landlady. She neglected him because it was hard enough just to take care of herself. Her coach suggested bringing her brother to the gym, but she didn't want to be indebted to that person. She also didn't want to tell her friends about her family's dirty laundry. Then one day, she came back from training and found Uni having a seizure. It happened while the landlady was out, and in that terrifying moment, she had only one thought. She was afraid that if her brother died, she would be all alone. It seemed crazy now. While her brother was struggling with a seizure, she was worried about being alone. Under the bright lights, Uni looked different. His hair had turned white and his light brown eyes had turned red. It was a rare disease that caused the body's pigment to fade, a disease not even recognized by the scientific community, but it led to death by starvation. And now, Elia thought her rebirth into this world was a chance for redemption. Later, the Duke was told that Caleb had a slight cough and that Lady Elia had stayed with him all night. She was a bit exhausted after the incident, and now Edwin was asking if they would dine together. Cedric agreed, especially because he wanted to talk to his wife. Naturally, Caleb, who was already much better, would also join them for the meal. The Duke decided not to hide things anymore. All that was left was to accept the situation. Edwin was curious about what the Duke was hiding and asked him to share it with him first, but the guy just brushed him off and told him to mind his own business. Later, Cedric learned from his brother that he had been having nightmares all this time, and he didn't understand why Caleb hadn't said anything sooner. The boy just thought his seizure last night might have been caused by a nightmare. These kinds of dreams have been plaguing him ever since he returned to the duchy. The child apologized for not saying anything right away. He just didn't want to worry anyone. Cedric also apologized to his brother for not noticing that something was bothering him. Then they asked Caleb to tell them what he had been dreaming about. He clenched his fists and said he would wake up remembering nothing. But recently he had started to remember some things. From his reaction, Elia could tell it was hard for him. She told him not to say anything if he couldn't, but the boy insisted he felt much better now. He was finally ready to tell his brother and Elia about his dreams. Every time in his dream, Caleb would stare mesmerized at the endless ocean. But when he came to his senses, a black wave had already submerged his feet. The boy felt scared and started to back away, but the waves rose at lightning speed, leaving him no place to escape. His body felt as heavy as lead, unable to move, and it became harder and harder to breathe. Just when Caleb thought he was doomed to drown forever, he would suddenly wake up. The boy's story sounded a bit scary, but it was just a dream, right? Only this time, the little Duke's nightmare was different. This time, as he sank into the dark, endless sea, a strange and evil thing began to approach him. He couldn't describe exactly what it was, but it looked like a black figure with legs. When Elia heard about the dream that was troubling the child, it dawned on her. Since he couldn't explain it, he decided to draw the thing. Soon, they were all looking at something that resembled a giant black spider. It was huge compared to Caleb. Cedric found it strange. His brother wasn't usually afraid of spiders. Even Olivia and Edwin were scared by the drawing. They wouldn't want to see that in their dreams. Elia remembered something that could be covered in pitch black fur with legs bent at right angles. Just then, Caleb admitted that the creature wasn't trying to hurt him. It was just walking towards him menacingly. He still didn't understand why he kept having these nightmares. His brother praised him for his courage in telling them everything, knowing it was difficult to recall. Elia also chimed in to encourage him, saying it was amazing that he could face his fears and tell them everything. She had always thought he was a brave kid. Just then, he looked at her very seriously and asked if he could call her sister. Elia found it strange. So far, he had been calling her by her name, but he was the future Duke, after all, and his position required it. But now it was different because Elia was a part of this family, and because Caleb called Cedric Big Brother. He wanted to call Elia Big Sister too. Besides, she had let him call her that before, so he hoped she still wouldn't mind now. Elia was silent for a few seconds, as if contemplating something important. Then she told him to just call her Elia. This confused him, and he didn't understand why she would object now. She explained that she was already used to Caleb calling her by her first name and felt there was no need to change. The child agreed, looking a little dejected, but it was clear he was hurt. Cedric noticed his wife's face stiffen for a moment. Just then, someone announced that the young master's law tutor had arrived. It was time for his lesson, but Caleb wasn't very enthusiastic about it. An assistant approached Cedric, reminding him that he needed to leave for a scheduled event, but the Duke believed it was more important to find the source of his younger brother's nightmares. The child promised to talk about it later, and Cedric agreed with what his brother said, promising they would get together as soon as the event was over. The boy walked over to Elia, promising to see her again soon. He gave her a sweet smile, letting her know he was okay for now. But she knew it wasn't that simple, and she really wanted to help the child. On the way to the event, Edwin asked Cedric why Elia wouldn't let Caleb call her sister. But he suddenly realized that his boss didn't like him asking too many questions about the Duchess. Still, he was super curious, as he had expected her to agree as well. Meanwhile, Cedric was thinking that this whole decision had something to do with a man named Uni. After returning to her quarters, Elia was back, and Olivia noticed the Duchess looked somewhat dejected. The girl worried her decision might have hurt Caleb's heart, but the moment he asked to call her sister, she had felt a jolt in her heart. She tried to imagine the young Duke addressing her that way, and she wanted to say yes to him, but after what happened yesterday, she realized she saw Uni's shadow in him. Something felt wrong inside her. She wanted to do for him the things she couldn't do for her own younger brother. But if Caleb called her sister, she would see Uni's shadow in him for the rest of her life. Elia knew she couldn't go on like this, because they were two completely different people. She tried to push aside all extraneous thoughts and see Caleb as himself. Then she decided to confirm something and planned to take a look inside the child's room. Olivia was surprised by this sudden decision and asked if she could accompany the Duchess, adding that the maids had already cleaned everything and there was likely nothing left after yesterday. But Elia recalled the original story. What she was going to check was something completely different. Calypso, the creature from his nightmares, appeared after Cedric's death when he cursed the world. It granted him power in exchange for devouring the boy's dreams. The great demon Mephisto. If it really was him, Elia wanted to figure out why he had appeared now of all times. Cedric headed to the temple, where he would perform a ceremony to swear an oath of loyalty. After this, he would become an official member of the Indigencia family. This noble ceremony was basically a curse, because if he betrayed the family, darkness would devour him alive. This was why most people would refuse the ritual, but Cedric had agreed. Edwin was by his side, and afterwards, the Duke gave him another task. It sounded a bit strange for an assistant, but his boss wanted him to find out who Uni was. Cedric explained to him that Uni was someone very important to Elia. He couldn't ask her directly, so he ordered his assistant to find out who this person was. All the Duke knew was the name and nothing else, not even if they were male or female or their age. But he suspected it might be a young boy and his wife's younger brother. Edwin had to figure all this out, and it had to be done discreetly. Meanwhile, Elia was already in Caleb's room, peering under the bed. Olivia was a little confused by her mistress's actions, not understanding what she was doing. But the Duchess herself didn't know what she was looking for and just decided to look around. There was no creature under the bed, but in the original story, that's where it lived. Elia wanted to resolve this as soon as possible, or the boy might suffer from nightmares again. Mephisto would devour the dreams of those who made a deal with him, after which they would start having nightmares. In the original story, Callie became more sensitive because of this. While he was in class, Elia wanted to figure everything out. But then, her gaze fell on the ceiling, and she noticed a terrifying thing above the chandelier with 9 slanted eyes. Olivia didn't notice anything, but she was frightened by the look on her mistress's face at that moment. What Elia wanted to know was why on earth Mephisto was living on the chandelier. The moment the demon realized it had been discovered, it started swinging on the chandelier like a madman. The unsuspecting maid was standing right below him, and Elia, fearing for her life, barely managed to push Olivia out of the way. Just then, the chandelier crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces, and a dark energy filled the surroundings. The maid froze in fear, completely at a loss. Suddenly, the room was illuminated by a bright light, and a magical shield appeared in midair. Cedric also appeared in the room out of thin air, immediately pulling his wife to his side to protect her. He then explained that he had sensed danger and teleported over at once. She thanked him and finally realized that Cedric was the most powerful mage in the world. Mephisto was still hanging from the ceiling, and Elia decided to capture him alive. But when she realized her husband knew this demon, she was completely stunned. Cedric berated him for endangering his younger brother and his wife. Elia started to panic a little, while the Duke knew he had to capture this thing alive, and he had to act quickly before Olivia could see it. Cedric trapped it in a magic bubble. It now looked like a soap bubble, but could hide it from others' sight. Olivia was worried about the fallen chandelier, thinking it was her fault, but Elia calmed her down, explaining it was just an accident and that she was completely fine. The maid still wanted to check if the Duchess was hurt, just as Caleb walked in. He was followed by a breathless Edwin, who had run over to see if his master was all right. When Cedric teleported, he had left his assistant alone in the temple. Caleb noticed the broken chandelier and asked what on earth had happened. They told him they had caught the source of all his nightmares. And that source was the great demon, the king of lies, Mephisto himself. As Cedric explained all this, Callie and Elia were both listening intently. But it suddenly occurred to her, how did her husband know all this? He had never met him before. Meanwhile, Callie started examining the bubble. He was surprised that there was a demon inside. From his reaction, Elia concluded that the child already knew of Mephisto's existence. But then he picked up the bubble and said in surprise that this was the Sage of Indigencia. These words left Elia completely stunned, and she couldn't believe that the great demon who gave Caleb his power was actually their family's sage and guardian. The Duke explained that those who had gone through the ceremony would, in a way, become one with Indigencia. This gave them a keener perception of events happening throughout the entire duchy. That was why Cedric could instantly sense his wife was in danger and immediately teleport to her side, leaving Edwin standing there, completely unaware of what had happened. After appearing in his brother's room, the Duke had shielded Elia from the chandelier fragments that were falling on her. He also knew at once who he was facing, a sage controlled by Indigencia, the great demon, the king of fraud, Mephisto. Now Elia was curious. If Cedric knew Mephisto was the sage, why did he treat him that way? But the Duke could not overlook the fact that the demon had dared to endanger his family at that moment. His words moved her deeply, but she didn't want Cedric to put himself in harm's way and told him not to do it again. Cedric explained that the Indigencia family had obtained their ducal title through marriage with the royal family, and their lineage could be traced back a long time. In that era, the Elaphinum Empire, which was the Elf Kingdom, ruled the world. Wars with other races were incessant, like a never-ending daily routine. Once, during a war with the dwarves, something happened. As Cedric spoke, his younger brother was drawing. To help Elia understand, the Duke continued. The dwarves possessed powerful weapons, but their command abilities were poor. They couldn't defeat the elves and humans, so they sought other methods, summoning a demon from the underworld to borrow its wisdom. In Collie's drawing, it actually looked a bit comical. So, the royal family wanted to find a way to thwart the dwarves and prevent them from winning, and the Indigencia family would be the force to achieve this goal for them. Gravity magic was considered the strongest, so it was perfectly suited for dealing with demons. But even gravity magic was no match for the demon's raw power. Just before the mage was about to be defeated, the demon proposed a deal. They could control him, right? So he asked them to teach him gravity magic, promising not to harm them. The demon swore that if they accepted this offer, their power would be greatly enhanced. And that demon was Mephisto. The Indigencia family joined forces with him to avoid being annihilated and concealed this from the royal family. They couldn't let anyone know that the knight sent to conquer the demon had become its servant. But rumors spread that the Indigencia family had made a deal with the demon. That's why they made Mephisto the family sage, and he, in turn, helped them perfect their magic. Now Elia understood what was going on, and she remembered that in the novel, Mephisto often trained Callie. But the details she had just heard were not in the original story. In the book, this demon was powerful and formidable, but now he was in a soap bubble, and in this state, he looked more like a cotton ball. Suddenly, it turned out Mephisto could hear everything and was not happy about being talked about this way. The bubble burst instantly, and he demanded an apology for being called a cotton ball. But Khalid wasn't going to apologize for his words. He was the one who had called him that, and explained that even if Mephisto was the sage, he still caused trouble for the future Grand Duke. The demon cowered like a frightened kitten, admitting he was just too hungry. Elia decided to intervene, explaining that the sage should have talked to the child first. The demon didn't like a woman talking down to him like that, but Cedric immediately shut him up. She was his wife, after all. Still, Mephisto was angry that someone was ordering him, the nine-eyed sage, around. Elia remembered that in the original story, 9 is considered the largest number. This is also related to the fact that there can be at most 9 magic circles, which is why Mephisto was boasting, because demons are born with an eye for each magic circle. Even so, Elia didn't like the creature speaking to her with that kind of attitude, and she glared at him as if looking at a small child who had just made a mistake. The demon didn't seem to want to admit any fault and even started complaining, which was different from his behavior in the original story. Mephisto blurted out that Elia was starving him to death and called her a bad woman. What really caught her off guard was that Mephisto saw her as a fairy and questioned why she was with him. I mean, fairies and demons are complete opposites. Then he started poking her with his claws, demanding that she be kicked out. It was then that Elia realized that Cedric and Caleb didn't know she was a fairy yet. Now she was scrambling to figure out a way to defuse the situation before the creature caused her more trouble. Her options were to play dumb or to remind everyone that she had amnesia. She had to think of something fast, but just then, the boy grabbed the fluffy fur ball. He glared at the sage, explaining that he had been holding back because his brother and Elia were present and demanded. Mephisto explained why he had spoken ill of her like that. He lowered his voice, becoming very serious, and declared that the thing had no right to call Elia a mere woman. She tried to calm the boy down, telling him she was fine, but Caleb didn't understand why she was stopping him, as Mephisto deserved a good beating right now. I mean, he was being disrespectful to the Duchess, and the little Grand Duke would never tolerate such a thing. Elia was at a loss for words, not knowing what to say, because sometimes when Caleb showed this side of him, she was reminded of that enigmatic villain. But the Caleb she knew now was completely different, and if Elia could lift the curse on Cedric, he wouldn't turn into a bad person. Just then, Cedric intervened, telling his younger brother to listen to Elia and calm down. The boy agreed and let go of Mephisto, and the little guy jumped onto the Duke's shoulder, hiding behind him. The whole thing was getting weirder and weirder. Then Caleb confessed that the demon had started it, tormenting him with nightmares, and was now acting like a total jerk. No wonder the boy was in a bad mood, and the demon didn't even seem to want to apologize. Suddenly, Elia suggested they just beat the guy up to teach it some manners. Caleb fully agreed with the idea, even suggesting 3 hard smacks. Even Cedric agreed. A small lesson like that would do Mephisto good. To avoid the beating, he admitted that he knew another way to the Temple of Knowledge. Everyone immediately turned their attention to the demon and demanded that he elaborate. But he asked them to sit down first and promised not to hit him. Then he explained that this path to the temple was different from the one that was currently blocked. Most people thought there was only one way in, but in reality, there were other ways to get there. Elia was surprised that there was more than one path, as she only knew about the one Daphne had used. Caleb reminded the sage that the Holy Land was once the nest of a dragon who was on good terms with the first emperor. He didn't refute it and added that this world wasn't just made up of humans. The Duke realized that minority races also knew the path to the Temple of Knowledge, which was news to him. It turned out that other races with their own societies really did exist. In Aegean, one of them was the fairies, which was Elia's race. Then there were the dwarves, which Caleb explained with a drawing. In addition, there were a few dragons and their descendants, the dragonkin. It was a world where humans, fairies, dwarves, and dragonkin coexisted, but the original story only mentioned humans and fairies. Caleb thought he needed to go meet those minority races now, but they might not be very friendly. Mephisto didn't think it was a big deal because they could just go find the fairies, even though people said they were nearly extinct. I mean, 200 years ago, when a prince started that rebellion, a large number of pure-blooded fairies were wiped out. However, half-blooded fairies and their descendants still walked among humans. At this, the Duke glanced at Elia, and she panicked, thinking he thought she was a half-blood. I mean, she did have pink hair and the gem-like eyes that only fairies possessed. Then Elia started to wonder if everything would go smoothly if they encountered other fairies while searching for the minority races. Just then, Mephisto chimed in, trying to say that there was a pure-blooded fairy right in front of the Duke, but before he could finish, the girl grabbed him and squashed him like a beanbag. She pretended to just be annoyed by his whining, emphasizing that now was not the time to dawdle, that they had to get to the temple as soon as possible, which meant finding that minority race right away. Later that evening, they brought the Villabim newspaper to the Empress, Her Majesty Renilica Ipresent. She had her maid place the newspaper on the table and then leave. She was angry because she had no idea why he hadn't come to see her. And on the front page of the newspaper was a happy and heartwarming photo of Cedric and Elia. However, the Empress's attention was more focused on the Duke's face as she racked her brain, wondering what else she could do to make him come.